We're getting ready to start. If you'd silence your cell phones, please. Good morning, everybody. After a brief delay because of a computer malfunction, we are ready to begin. It is Monday, November 7th, 2022. This is a workshop meeting of the Commissioners of the City of Rehoboth Beach. We are in the Commissioners' Room, second floor at City Hall. I'd like to call this meeting to order at 9:03 a.m. Would you please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We'll start off with roll call. Commissioner Tony Sharp.
Here.
Commissioner Jay Legree.
Here.
Commissioner Ed Stranowski.
Here.
Commissioner Patrick Gossett.
Here.
Commissioner Tim Bennett.
Here.
Commissioner Bunky Markert.
Here.
Mayor Stan Mills. We have a full complement of the mayor and commissioners, and we have a quorum and are formally able to conduct business today. Thank you all for being here. I'd also like to acknowledge staff that's here, City Secretary Ann Womack, Interim City Manager Evan Miller, City Solicitor Glenn Mandalis, Chief Keith Banks of the Police Department, Public Works Supervisor Kevin Williamson back there, and we've got Howard Rothstein and Corey Schenko, Matt Janis of all of Building and Licensing. Thank you all for being here too, staff members. We appreciate it. With that, I'd like to thank everybody that's here in person. As you know, the program is we have certain topics, and at certain times I will call on you and allow you to give us feedback which is desired on all the topics. Also like to thank those that are watching, not here with us today. And a reminder that support documents, which are documents that support our individual agenda items when they are ready, are embedded in the electronic agenda available from www.cityrehoboth.com on the portal. Seek out the calendar, seek out the meeting date, and you'll be able to access the same documents that we have up here if they're available as a support document. With that, we'll go to correspondence. You've got 2 items that are embedded in the agenda. When they are received early enough, they are embedded in the agenda. We have an email from Hoyt Decker and an email from Julie Davis on different topics that will be brought up at the appropriate time. With that, we will go to the city manager's report.
Good morning, Mayor, Commissioners, members of the public. An update on the water service line inspections. The Water Department's continuing to work in Area 2, which you'll recall is the area bounded by Bayard Avenue, Brooklyn Avenue, the Boardwalk, East Lake Drive, and Penn Street. Progress in that area has been very slow due to the water main and service line work on Norfolk Street. Inspections in this area will continue throughout this calendar year before moving to Area 3, which is Country Club Estates. Updates will continue to be provided on the city website under the current city projects page. Speaking of the Norfolk Street project, the water, sewer, pavement work, and concrete work are all completed. Milling is scheduled to begin today, November 7th, and should take most of this week. The actual paving is scheduled to start next Monday, the 14th, and all work in the area is expected to be completed by Thanksgiving. And again, we appreciate the patience and accommodation of the residents in that area. This week, several of our city employees will be participating in the DFIT-sponsored Snowplow Rodeo. That is on Wednesday, November 9th. There are a total of 33 driver contestants, some competing in multiple divisions being CDL, non-CDL, and small equipment. The rodeo includes a driving course that will test one's ability to maneuver plow trucks with finesse at a productive speed. Similar competitions are held across the country to sharpen truck handling skills, remind drivers of the many hazards that await them with the winter storms, and help them balance speed with safety. Reminder about the upcoming holidays this week. City Hall will be closed tomorrow, Tuesday, November 8th for Election Day, Thursday, November 10th, beginning at 12:30 p.m. for Returns Day, and all day Friday, November 11th for Veterans Day. And then finally, budget season has officially begun. So memos were actually distributed to the department heads last week, and department budget first drafts are going to be due in early December. The finance director, Burt Dukes, and I will begin meeting with the department heads throughout December to prepare a first draft of the budget for a future meeting in January with the Board of Commissioners. And that's all I have, Mayor.
Thank you. Any questions of the city manager? If not, thank you very much. With that, we'll go to the city solicitor's report.
Thank you, Mayor. First question is, how do I get a ticket to the snowplow competition? so a couple of litigation updates. In Ocean Bay Mart, as you know, there was a motion for re-argument there. The plaintiff has filed their papers. Our papers are due today. We only get a 6-page response because we're at the end of this case. I keep saying we're at the end of this case. 6 pages. I've reviewed it. It's really tight. We'll file it today, and I can get it out to all of you to review after that. But then, I know you're going to ask me, Commissioner Sharp, so it sets a new 90-day clock. I don't expect it to take a full 90 days. Usually the Supreme Court will review things like this and probably within 3 to 4 weeks issue a 1-page thing that says affirmed for the reasons stated previously. But if they see something new here, they could ask for oral argument and do another written opinion. I don't expect that in this case. So, but I expected it to be done, 2 months ago. So we're still there. That gets filed today. That's the last paper we'll file, and there might be oral argument, but I don't anticipate that.
So could you just clarify, City Solicitor, when does the clock start running again?
Today.
Today
When we file it, yep.
For 90 days.
For 90 days.
Thank you.
Everything works in 90 days at the court.
Yeah,
at the court system.
thank you.
Sure. Then in the Belhaven variance case, no appeal was filed, and that appeal period has run. So that decision of the Superior Court is going to stand, and we'll just move forward with things as they are. That's all I have on litigation updates. Any questions? Thanks.
If not, thank you, Glenn. Appreciate it. With that, we're going to go right into old business. Item A, presentations on the status of the health of Lake Gerar by Todd Fritchman of Envirotech, Environmental Consulting, and follow-up discussions. If you recall, Todd was here and made part one of a three-part presentation at our last workshop meeting. Today, he's going to be talking about a comprehensive lake management plan for Lake Gerar. He'll also be talking about the Lake Gerar West Prong Accretion Remediation Project. The goals here, at least in my mind, are to figure out a path forward on how to approach dredging the West Prong of Lake Gerar. I'd like to deviate a little on our presentation protocol this morning. We have a member that's of the audience that has lived on the lake for many years, and I'd like her to address us first and share her thoughts with it in the hopes that maybe some of what her concerns are would be addressed during the two presentations today. So Kitty, if you want to come up here, take Kitty number two, have her take her microphone here with her in case we ask questions.
I was at your house a couple years ago.
Make sure that microphone, Kitty number two, is in front of her mouth.
She'll, oh yeah.
There we go.
Good.
Okay. I've asked a couple questions that you can answer after I finish. I have to read what I've said so much, I had to write it down. Is anyone here representing Solar 3? And what connection does Solar 3 organization have with the city of Rehoboth Beach? And why was Envirotech hired by the city, and for what? That's the questions I had. About 3 years ago, the city manager showed me a book of city projects planned for 2021, and Lake Gerar was listed to be dredged, and it never happened. Lake Gerar never looked like it does now on the west end near Bad Hair Day, and full of algae and weeds. The wildlife kept it much cleaner by coming and going every day. And why was Todd Fritchman hired by the city? The buffer he had planted is consuming the lake by weeds spreading on all sides of the lake. How can one person decide to eliminate the wildlife on Lake Gerar and not on Silver Lake? With the Atlantic Ocean, Rehoboth Bay, Indian River, Gordon's Pond, 3 lakes in Rehoboth, it's really, people should not move here if they don't object to the wildlife. My neighbors and I enjoy seeing the herons, ducks, geese on Lake Gerar. The city used to feed them every day, and a lady from Lewis came over and fed them. And that's when Todd took pictures of so many feedings going on. I have pictures with me that show a much better Lake Gerar of many years, and the wildlife is not. And why is the wildlife not prohibited on Silver Lake? Why the difference? They have the wildlife and Lake Gerar does not. As for the money to correct this problem, maybe you could use some of the 7 million parking meter money that the city has gotten. They spent money on a dock and they had playgrounds. They spent money for that. Water fountains were installed on Silver Lake, and now Mr. Childers, the vice president of Solar 3, wants them removed. And also the aerators that on Lake Gerar, but there are none on Silver Lake, and I don't understand why. I won't be here to see the change, but for 10 years I've pleaded with the city and Envirotech to clear up the lake and remove the buffer and weeds consuming the lake, and enjoy the presence of wildlife as it has been for hundreds of years. And now that all I see are the snapping turtles sunning on the side of the banks of the Lake Gerar. These last 10 years have left me saddened by the city's neglect of Lake Gerar and Cranberry Park. And I do have pictures if anybody wants to see them. That's all I've got to say.
Thank you, Kitty. Anybody, any questions for Commissioner Legree?
Kitty, did you,
Wait.
Let me see if
Wait a
I
minute.
can use this.
She's using a microphone.
can you hear me now? Did you tell me that you had snakes in your basement?
I did. And I never had those before.
Never had those before lately.
And I have fox walking right up to the front door. It's just never been the same. Since they put the buffer, it was, and no one sees that from the street because it's behind my house and on Olive Avenue. The north side by the Henlopen, that lake looks fine. So if you go over the bridge, you don't see what I'm talking about. But if you walk behind my house and the people along that area, it's awful. It's terrible back there. And
There are white-footed deer mice who live in the debris that, can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
I hear you, but I didn't know what you said.
There are mice that live in that debris, those dead
Yeah,
weeds.
I see mice running around.
Yeah.
I never saw any of that.
No.
I've lived there 75 years, and I've been in Rehoboth for 85 years.
Yeah,
So
they
I've
have,
seen a lot.
yeah,
She's 90.
the mice love that area, and they live there, and they can live there all year long, and they can live there in the wintertime. But guess what likes to eat the mice? The snakes come to eat the mice. And
The snakes come to eat the mice, he's saying, because they're, yeah.
so that's why you have snakes.
My neighbor came across the street, and I was going out to play bridge one day, and a great big snake was in my front yard, and I had to kill the thing. It was awful.
And my thought is the fox probably comes and eats a few mice too when it gets to be wintertime. And there's not a lot of other game to eat. The fox will come down and eat those
Well,
mice.
The pictures that I have with me of the back of my house and the lake before the buffer is beautiful. There's no weeds, there's no trash in the park. I mean, it was, and I have the pictures if anybody would like to see them.
Well, Kitty, let me just describe the pictures real quick. If you go down and you look at Lake Gerar today on the city-owned portions, you will see at least, 10-foot plus buffer zones there. And what Kitty is referring to, she has photographs going back probably 50 years of green grass going all the way up to the edge of the lake. And there's a difference. So, Kitty, let me try to answer some of your questions real quick. Is there anybody from Solar 3 here? They haven't identified themselves, so I would say probably not, but they listen, and they certainly will give us some feedback. In terms of who hired Envirotech, that was before my time, but there's no criticisms I have or have ever heard of Envirotech. They were hired by the city many years ago and be very transparent in their methodology for approaching lake health and everything. So there's no qualms about that. What I would like to do is I know you still have some questions unanswered, but let's let Todd give his two presentations today. And if there's still questions left over, then I can meet with you, or Commissioner Legree can meet with you. And
I really don't understand why Silver Lake has wildlife. Nobody objects to that. And there's no big buffer. And why do you have to have it in Lake Gerar?
well, we do have buffers around Silver Lake on this.
Childers house, those places, those houses, the grass goes right to the lake.
Well, on the areas where the city owns, we do have buffers. All righty. So we hear you. Thank you. So have a seat, and we'll see if we can answer some of your questions. Thank you, Kitty and Kitty, both Kitties. So that's a little departure from normal, but I wanted her questions out in the forefront because she's lived on the lake 70, 80 years, I think. Thank you. With that, do you want to introduce Todd?
No, Todd's here to give a presentation on the Lake Gerar management plan as well as the accretion restoration project. So turn it over to you, Todd.
Can we get the presentation up on the screen? Is it appropriate to hand out a note set?
Sure.
We got 7, so. Good morning, everyone. Todd Fritchman, Envirotech Environmental Consulting. I'm a dual-degreed aquatic biologist, a state of Delaware certified stormwater and sediment construction reviewer, and I've spent the last 32 years in the stormwater management, comprehensive maintenance and management planning realm, active implementation of comprehensive stormwater management planning in both practicum and academics. So today there are 2 primary goals. Number 1, to present the comprehensive lake management plan that has been in place since the U.S. Conservation Service provided the grant mechanism for the restoration of Lake Gerar due to the primary objectives of profound sediment and erosion control, needs around the lake, exposed soils due to herbivory and human impact, also what was deemed and necessary for a Canada goose control program, and also for water quality management for submerged rooted aquatic vegetation, pond weeds, and algae, and other illicit discharges and human impacts. So I'm going to go through that management plan and outline now.
Todd, quick question. What year was that the grant was issued and work began?
I believe that was 2003, something to that effect.
Thank you.
I don't recall to a T. I'd have to look back. I believe it was 2003. The process started. It took a number of years to get this in place with working through interagencies. It was many agencies involved. Okay, I have provided the commissioners with a menu of the comprehensive stormwater management maintenance units and services for reference as notes. I'm going to go over those now. The comprehensive Lake Gerar management plan has a multitude of components to it, and they include the following: pond embankment and soil stabilization, exotic and native nuisance aquatic vegetation control, and emergent growth vegetation control, and terrestrial vegetation control in the riparian zones. That is the buffer areas. Algae and cyanobacteria control, fish and wildlife management for 3 main things. Obviously, Lake Gerar is a fishery as a whole, for game fishing, for muskrat control, and primarily for Canada goose control. No other avian species, just the Canada goose. Water quality and habitat management, siltation of forebays, organic matter accumulation removal, benthic macroinvertebrate assessments for overall health, and water quality monitoring through the EPA rapid bioassessment process by assessing the aquatic macroinvertebrates to determine the overall water quality. Physical and water quality perimeter testing, if and when needed. Aeration through air diffuser systems. Riparian buffers, the establishment and maintenance and management of those no-mow zones around the pond as a best management practice recommended by the Department of Natural Resources, U.S. Conservation Service, Department of Agriculture, EPA, and multitudes of other regulatory agencies. Erosion control and negative human impacts. So then we go into the criteria of the management plan, which is the lake embankment and soil stabilization, then the aquatic nuisance and exotic invasive vegetation control, algae and cyanobacteria control, fish and wildlife, the methodologies, the permits that are required, the vegetation enhancements, that is the wildflower seedings and the emergent wetland plants that were installed on the littoral bench and throughout the system. Water quality and habitat, we did multitudes of habitat. We created a Atlantic white cedar bog with nesting sites, interpretive signage, and also did the emergent plantings to restore some of the water quality and provide habitat for the fishery. The siltation of 4 bays is a constant and monitoring and reporting process that is due to the siltation that I'll allude to in the next phase of this presentation, the next objectives, from all the watershed distribution of silt and sediment into the lake. Please remember, Lake Gerar serves as a stormwater management, water quantity and quality treatment facility for the city of Rehoboth, as the stormwater drain inlets are diverted into that lake where the water and whatever runs off the land, pesticides, fertilizers, herbicides, petroleum products, nutrients, soils, sediments, go into the lake. Organic matter accumulation, monitoring and removal, physical water quality parameters. We do various testing at different reasons after illicit discharges or during obvious nutrient loading when we have cyanobacteria blooms in the lake or major algae blooms. So the main parameters we're testing for are 1, phosphorus and phosphorus-containing compounds, and then nitrogen and nitrogen-containing compounds, because that is your most limiting factor of aquatic vegetation growth that we have to control those nutrients. The benthic macroinvertebrate testing is done regularly to ensure that the water quality is indeed, so these are things that you sample biota, such as mayfly larvae, dragonfly larvae, damselfly larvae, organisms that can only survive in water quality that has adequate pH, dissolved oxygen concentrations, and is not a eutrophic water body. Okay, mosquito control is done in the lake with the Gambesia holobrookii. The lake is stocked heavily with Gambesia, the eastern mosquito fish, which is the best biological control known to mankind. So we do not have mosquito breeding coming out of the lake. The buffers were a critical unit into sustaining and managing the lake, just like any other water body on the planet. This is to establish deep-rooted anchoring native plant stands around the wick zone. That is the areas of the lake that are saturated in wetland status, and that mowing in those areas creates rutting, liberation of nutrients out of the soil, death to the vegetation in there, and sinking of mowers into the mud and the mucks of the wetland status around the pond. So it is not an area that is suited for mowing, and one of the reasons it was converted into a buffer, as recommended by all the regulatory agencies and best management practices involved. Those buffers are managed with integrated vegetation management practices, invasive vegetation, woody stem trees, vines, greenbrier, poison ivy, multiflora rose, any type of exotic invasive Phragmites is removed constantly using EPA-registered products deemed necessary and appropriate for the specific target vegetative type. Obviously, all the licenses, insurance, and products used are constantly scrutinized and studied to provide the best possible mechanisms for managing the lake. And of course, first and foremost, the educational outreach is a part of this. It started back, I believe, in 2005 or 6 with a brochure and a mailing to the city residents announcing this, then workshops, and then continuous outreaches on the lake with various groups, and then annual reporting to the city and the commissioners, and then obviously a lot of work with the town managers in place and the various, now Liz Lingo with her department more involved in the management of the open spaces. So the educational outreach component continues all the time. With that being said, a brief overview of the lake management plan. Each one of those units can be broken down into many subunits as the notes indicate. Now I'd like to move on to the second objective, if I may, or should I answer questions on the management plan first?
Oh, let's go ahead and do it all. Do any commissioners, we'll open it up to the public after we've done both. Do any commissioners have questions so far?
I will have a lot of questions that you will probably not tolerate, so I can hold them for a while.
Okay. Go ahead to the second one.
Yeah, so essentially the maintenance and management plan is to prevent eutrophication, which the lake was highly eutrophied at the time, as per the need of the grant. And to prevent aquatic succession, as you see on the screen now, this is what has happened in the west prong of the lake, okay, of the north and south prong. The obvious most degraded is the west prong, and that's the most visible to the city. So that, just like the dead end canal situation in South Bethany, this is kind of the same thing. That west prong receives all the organic deposits, and the northeast wind fetch pushes everything into that canal so it cannot leave. The law of conservation of matter, we can't make it disappear with a wand. So when the leaf matter and the silts and sediments enter the lake, it's trapped in that prong where accretion and the bottom comes to the top. That is what has happened. It was accelerated by human impact, nature, and land watershed inputs into the storm drains and the other things that cause the accretion in that end of the lake. So this is what we have, just various examples. Land-based movement of organics into the lake. The soils that drain into the lake, constant. The unmaintained and unmanaged portion of the lake that is privately owned, so that the trees, the mature trees now, the leaf litter, the falling and succeeding branches, secondary stems that are falling into the lake, that is all accreting and falling in. You know, that's constant, never-ending, 24/7 for the last 90 years, perhaps. So now the end of that lake is literally several inches deep, filled with sediment and silt and accretion. The original lake bed is about 54 inches down, very, very deep. This end of the lake also did, in our sampling, we were able to determine this, and then historical reviews to determine this was an original dump site of the original family that owned the peninsula and the area around the lake. This was an actual dump where solid waste was deposited into the lake, and we did find that material in our sampling. So that's the bottom. You can actually see the bottom if you look closely, that west prong. Then we have illicit discharges that occur. You know, that blue tint to the water is from a phosphate latent product. We don't know what it is. We just know that our phosphorus levels went through the roof. Subsequently, we had an algae bloom. Something went down a storm drain and into the lake. So what we have now is the creation of these bogs. Okay, these right here that are growing because of the leaf matter and the organics, and now vegetation growing on the surface and so forth. Bear with me, I'm going to run through this real quick and get to the... Okay, so here we are at the West Prong accretion restoration. So to cut to the chase and just put it straight out, the goal is to remove the organic material, the silt and the sediment, and the layering that has occurred in that west prong to get it restored back to a 3.5 foot water column depth. There's still going to be subaqueous material underneath of that, but to go down to 54 inches would probably not be feasible or cost effective, so we're going to be following what's called Delaware Pond Code 378, get down to 3.5 foot depth, a aquatic bench shelf on each side, and follow the code. We have already completed the studies and did the soil analysis to determine. If you look at the right slide there, you can see what had occurred, the layering of needle leaves, deciduous leaves, and then we could actually tell when there was big rain events because the amount of sediment and silt that would be laying on top of the organics that creates an anoxic layer underneath. There's no oxygen for things to break down. So everything was perfectly preserved under there until you started getting up, things are being converted into mucks and peats and mucks at the surface. So again, showing you more of the contributing factors. Now the process to do this. Bear with me, I'm skipping through some things here. So the process to do this is to come in with basically an excavator, a stick arm excavator with a forked bucket with holes in the end of it. We've got to put up a turbidity curtain at the end of the west prong. We have to set up dewatering stations to remove all the organic material and the sediments and place it into dewatering chambers until the water drains out of that material. That's a temporary, several-month period where we can't haul away wet material where water, drips out. This is regulatory compliancy stuff that we have to follow. So the dewatering chambers, the material will be placed in those dewatering chambers, and over a period of time, once it solidifies, then we can remove all that and take it away. We will put a turbidity curtain in across the prong so that to prevent as much material from negatively impacting the rest of the lake as possible. We would have to temporarily decommission the playground or the swing set there, and several of the trees would have to be limbed up under best management practice so that we can get in and access the west prong. The target area for just this project, nothing else, just this objective, is 80 feet by 50 feet. So we will be targeting an 80 feet by 50-foot zone, okay, which is the meets and bounds the limit of the accreting bog, where we actually have the material has now formed a bog on the surface, an island, if you will, a floating bog. So that area is the target to be removed. Also, we highly recommend that the storm drain inlet pipe to that end of the lake there be reconstructed. It's an old metal culvert. It has a connection, a joint box, catch basin that it's connected to. That pipe is dilapidated. It does not have any stabilization around it, so it's failing. And in that project, we recommend that is replaced as well, in up to code in standard DENREC design format. And the other thing is, as we lift and remove all this material, there's going to be a lot of nutrients liberated. In other words, the phosphorus and nitrogen is sequestered in the water. When we start all this disturbance activity, there's going to be a negative impact. That nutrient's going to be liberated. Silts and sediments and turbidity will be liberated. The curtain will hold as much as possible, but they are not 100%. So we do recommend a sequestering of the nutrients after this project is over with Utrizorb, which is a phosphorus binding technology to remove the nutrients so that we don't end up with an aesthetic nightmare of a massive cyanoalgae bloom or other algae types that degrade the aesthetic of the lake, because right now the water is crystal clear and we want to keep it that way. So that's basically an outline of the project. It's in concept, it's really easy. We're just scooping out a bunch of muck and sediment and dewatering and then hauling away. Now there's a lot of details in there that are regulatory compliancy and so forth. We would have a certified construction reviewer on site, an individual that does this every single work day, operating the machinery and running the crew there on site if the city does indeed decide to deal with this accretion.
Thank you, Todd. I'd like to ask a couple questions about the first presentation and the second presentation before I turn it over to the commissioners, if you don't mind. The comprehensive management plan, it's been around for 15+ years. A lot of us weren't even aware of it, so this is kind of interesting to find out. Can you give us a report card grade on the management plan, and have we been following it? Have we been doing anything? Has it been gathering dust on a shelf? Just give us a little feedback if you could there.
Sure, the management plan has been followed to a T. It's been followed to a T other than restoring accretion. It's the only thing that hasn't been done. And when we say restoring accretion, I mean accretion on a mass scale outside of routine maintenance. We're cleaning organics out of the end of pipes and in forebays, but we're not cleaning out a lake because that's impossible for a man or a woman to do that. You would drown. You have to, you know. So, yeah, we have followed the maintenance and management plan to a T. The buffers at one point did get larger. The buffers did get larger than the original program design parameter of 10 feet around the system, but that was done out of logic. Didn't have anything to do with me or the program itself. That was done by the city during times where it was deemed those soils to be completely saturated in wetland status, so they weren't mowed. But now that has been indeed brought back to the conforming of inside of the tree grant program. If you recall, years ago, there was, I think it was the Delaware Forestry Service, or somebody provided a grant to put in a lot of woody stem trees around the lake. Good job. And the buffer was brought into the edge of those, and that's where it got outside of those, and now it's been brought back. Other than that, most objectives and goals of the program have been met. There is no erosive soil within the buffer and around the shoreline of the lake now. We have a great emergent wetland plant stand all the way around the lake now. We have viable buffers that have been graded by the Department of Natural Resources Environmental Control multiple times. Each report card was an A+. The usability of the lake, from what I understand, polling real estate agents and so forth that were having trouble renting around there initially, there's no problem with that anymore. The fishery is outstanding. We could go there today and catch 30 bass. If you stood on my shoulder, I could show you how to do it after the meeting or anytime. So yes, we are following the plan to a T.
Thank you. So 2 questions on the second part, which is remediation of the accretion in the West Prong. I've heard us talk about remediating it, and a lot of us want to do that. I definitely want to do it. It's getting uglier. It's looking uglier. It seems to be reducing the footprint of the lake, and I'm worried about all that. But what have we talked about in terms of preventing what caused this in the first place?
Yeah, so to prevent it, there are 2 basic things. A watershed management plan specifically for stormwater, ensuring all silts and sediments are contained on retrofit lots, on active build-out, things that take place in the city. Because a pile of soil is placed in the street away from the lake doesn't mean that that soil will not be transported to the lake. All the land in the city goes to one of the water bodies. So if we have exposed soils laying out for a rain event and hydrology to move the soil, it all ends up into the lake, just like Silver Lake's West Prong. The state came in and did their thing on that because of the accretion, the exact same thing. So creating a comprehensive sediment and erosion control program for holding silts and sediments on place, on lots, contained all the time, and this is not difficult. That's one component. The other component is trying to set up something with maybe the private landowners on the peninsula about dealing with the deadfall. A lot of these trees are mature and have reached their lifespan, and they are now beginning to topple and fall into the lake. That's a lot, tons and tons of biomass. Tons of biomass. That can't go away unless we have something in place with those landowners to start working on getting these 80-foot trees, 5-foot stems out of the lake. We're not going to be able to stop the biomass from coming in, but this is the first time in my life, I think, that, and I grew up on Lake Gerar as well, I think that this is the first time that it's ever been mucked out, if you will. In the industry, we call it mucking it out. So there are two primary things: a sediment erosion control program to protect the lake, which is standard in the United States of America. Now we have a comprehensive sediment erosion control program. It's easy. This is all easy stuff. And third is to work on that peninsula and start removing some of the tree material that's falling in. Those are the two major things.
So we have in place, at least in its infancy, a sediment control program where we require silt fencing around properties. So that's something. We have not addressed the pine shats falling into the lake and causing problems there. So that's something certainly we could do. I have not heard you mention installation of storm scepters or filters or anything. Is that because you want to control it back at the site rather than immediately emptying into the lake?
Yes, sir. Yeah, these pipes are direct discharge. I don't recommend storm scepters on anything with the lake. If you look at the screen now, like this is a soil pile in the streets of the city of Rehoboth. There's nothing containing that. In fact, that soil pile was on a storm drain, on top of it. That means all that soil was going directly into the lake. So controlling those site-specific things, if we had a storm scepter in place, that soil would immediately ruin the function of the storm scepter, because the soil would then lay on top of the sand, and the sand wouldn't be able to purify the water and clean it. It would be immediately, you'd have to redo the whole thing. You have to clean it right away. So I don't recommend anything except for your drain inlets, fixing pipes, like the deficient pipe end and correcting that at the end, back to how it should be. Bear with me 1 second. So you have a correct pipe discharge with stabilization. So that's what I'm referring to in terms of managing the soils and sediment erosion control activities. It's not possible to do this to 100% tile where you'd have no movement of soil, but to the maximum extent possible with diligence is the critical component to this going forward.
So my goal is to fund remediation of the accretion at some point, hopefully this next year so we can address it. But are there any steps we need to take that you recommend happen before the accretion remediation project takes place?
The recommendations that we have in terms of the lake management program have already been provided. CPRO, we're a steward of the Water Corporation with CPRO, the largest aquatic pesticide management corporation that exists, and all EPA registered products. So we now have a product that can strip the phosphorus out of the water much more cost effectively and efficiently than the products of the past. So we will be using that to prevent cyno blooms more proactively than to come and reactively treat. We are also implementing the Sonar 1 program with 2 granular applications a year to prevent submerged rooted aquatic vegetation growth so that the lake doesn't turn into a salad bowl of aquatic vegetation, and then we have to kill that, and all that nutrient is released, and you end up with an algae bloom subsequently, and this goes on for months till you get it under control again. We're able to now prevent all that from happening. So there has been some recommended changes that we've been working with Liz on with the products that we apply to the water to manage it.
Thank you, Todd. We're going to go up here to the commissioners before we go back to members of the public. Commissioner Legree, you had some questions?
Yes, I've never seen a lakes management plan. Does it exist somewhere that I don't know about? It's never crossed my desk. And this is kind of like an advertisement for a lake manager or something. But anyway, I can tick down these: aeration, riparian buffers, aquatic vegetation control, structure and functional deficiency, water quality management. We're failing on all of those. Unbeknownst to me, the Sea Grant of Delaware has been measuring the quality of our lakes. And I didn't even know it. And they've come up with some findings that are quite different from what I'm hearing here. And this year, we were closed for what? We've had 2 advisories on the Grenoble Place. For all the people who are interested, is where the outflow of Lake Gerar goes out into the ocean. DENREC comes by there certain times of the week during the summer, and they take grab samples at the surf line. And they send those back to the lab, and the lab runs the tests, and they tell you if you've got fecal contamination. And we had fecal contamination, but only advisories. And that's a new one for me. I've been so proud of the outfall of Lake Gerar up until this last year.
Jay,
Let
can
me
you
finish.
Can you break down your question so that, and we'll give him a chance to respond at some point?
He can respond at any time he wants to. Just
Thank you,
raise your
sir.
hand.
Let's do that
Just
now.
real quick, this is the second time that has come up. The Sea Grant water quality testing is not for Lake Gerar. That is
They
for the
tested
ocean.
Lake Gerar. Am I wrong?
Yeah, that's for the ocean. They're ocean testing. They're not testing the
They
lake
tested
system.
in 2 places, and they tell where they test. They tested at the weir, and they tested at the children's fishing dock. Are you not aware of that?
No, I'm not.
Well, they found that the oxygen level in the lake was low, which is the sign of a sick lake. And they also found enterics that were above the norm, but not dangerous. So there have been other tests going on during this time. That's the aeration part of it I'm talking about. The erosion is not controlled, and that's why your riparian buffers keep extending into the lake, because the sides of the lake are not controlled for erosion.
No, we don't have any erosion at this time. We have
That's
the
what
zero.
runs down the side of that hill and causes that muck.
No, that's outside of that's the watershed above the lake, sir.
That's correct.
It's a different area.
DENREC, that's correct. DENREC in their sediment and erosion control tells us how to manage that. And that's what the mayor's looking for, is to manage the erosion from the watershed coming into the lake.
Yeah, that
So
would be with the grass management. So we're talking. So
I'm
this lake
talking ab-
management plan goes from the edge of the buffer into the lake. It doesn't include any lands outside of the lake.
My stormwater plan encourages the area outside the lake that brings in water to the lake, and we need to get that slowed down and cleaned up.
I agree with you 100%, as I indicated in the report.
And that's called a stormwater management plan. The mayor talks about it, and we need one. I've not seen one for Lake Gerar. Now, for us to blame the private landowners for contaminating the north side of the lake is maybe true, but it's not fair. They live in the city limits, Mayor, and there's no reason why we can't get them to help clear the sides of the lake to stop the biomass.
Yeah, my intent, sir, was not to blame anyone. This is a natural process of trees that are maturing and dropping their shed.
And if you'll read the DENREC sediment and erosion control, you'll discover that wet ponds are supposed to have a 10-foot area where there are no trees growing on the lakeside. And we're not doing that.
We don't have any trees growing within 10 feet of the ordinary high water mark of Lake Gerar on any city-owned parcels other than what was already planted and was deemed to remain in place during the management plan. We have eliminated and not allowed any trees to grow within the riparian zone of Lake Gerar on any city-owned parcels as part of the comprehensive management plan.
I gave a presentation to the Rehoboth Beach homeowners, and I included a bunch of slides from the periphery of Lake Gerar, and they have posted those. They posted that presentation on their website, and I invite everybody to take a look at it. My photographs show something entirely different from what you're talking about. But the mayor wants a comprehensive stormwater management plan, and that includes the discharge area that brings all the muck into Lake Gerar, and specifically the discharge area that brings all the stuff down on the west side, on that west prong. And we're not controlling any of that. We're not controlling the trees that are falling into the lake. We're not controlling the erosion that's coming into the lake. We're not controlling a darn thing. We're dumping chemicals. And by the way, I hate to hear you say that you're going to manage this thing and that thing by dumping chemicals into the water. I hate that. And
We have to.
no, we don't have to. We need to keep the lake clean, keep the discharge clean, stop the erosion, and we'll have a great lake, just like Silver Lake. Mayor, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have, but I feel very passionate about this. And by the way, the Stormwater Management Task Force feels really passionate. If anybody wants to watch the stream of our last meeting.
Thank you, Jay.
Mayor.
Thank you, Jay.
Thanks for letting me finish.
Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else up here? Commissioner Sharp?
I'm trying to understand the fact that I've been looking at the West Prong for I don't know how many years now. And over time, it appears to have degraded and degraded and degraded, just visually. And I hope that's accurate in the way I'm expressing it. But I'm curious why we have not periodically done something to correct what is now, in your scientific explanation, a very severe situation on the West Prong. Have we missed opportunity after opportunity to have kept this at bay, if you will, by doing some things we didn't do?
Well, we've been reporting the accretion problem for the beginning of time since we started.
Reporting it to who?
To the city of Rehoboth, the town managers and commissioners.
We have had this on
everyone.
our radar for a long time.
Yes.
And this was actually in the budget until Jay spoke up years ago and immediately quashed the project, okay? With some of the same considerations, I think. And so, we've been trying to get it back on. And that's why I have a desire to figure out the next steps and let's budget it and let's do it, because you're right. Next year, it's going to look even worse. But one of the things I want to say, I'm going to hold you all, is that we had planned to do it, I don't know, several years ago when the Lake Avenue Phase 2 project came up. And so the city manager at the time in Public Works, I guess, whoever, the engineer, decided to forego the accretion project remediation until after the Lake Avenue project because they wanted to be able to not have the Lake Avenue project contribute to additional fill-in at the time. Is that correct? So that's where I'm frustrated that we have not been able to advance this.
Well, the reason for my question is wanting to try to understand. I think it would be very sad 15 years from now if folks are sitting here talking about the West Prong and you're having the same discussion that'll be on tape from the year 2022. So I'm trying to figure out, okay, what is it that we should be doing on a regular basis that we're not, so that this is prevented? And I think the whole discussion to me dovetails together. Because one of the things that frustrates me, Mayor, since I appreciate what frustrates you as well, is that we talk about our lakes in two different ways. To me, we have a scientific report on our lakes. And then more importantly to me is what our property owners and our visitors and anyone else who looks or tries to use the lakes happens to say about the lakes. They're certainly not going to approach it as Mr. Fritchman does. So to me, we've got two things here that are independent of one another, and they don't really talk very well to one another. So you know, I have heard Miss Kitty Cole be so concerned about this for years. And the buffers are, from an aesthetic standpoint and from a historic standpoint, I completely appreciate her position that it was better when they did not exist. From a scientific standpoint, I understand what you're saying about why they exist and why the change was made. So for me, we've got a number of things here in front of us that I'm just not clear yet, and maybe I don't need to be yet, on how we are going to advance this so that 10 or 15 years from now, we're not right back where we are right now. Because it's upsetting to me that to hear the statement that the management plan that I was not aware of is being followed to a T. I have a funny feeling that if you asked every single property owner around the lake, if that resonated with them, I'm not certain they would feel that at all. So the reason I raise it is we're coming at it from two different perspectives. And we need to balance how are we going to fix it for all of those, in my opinion. So back to you.
I think it's well said. Why I put this on here in three parts? Remember, we had a previous presentation and these two presentations is so that we can forge the path forward.
Right.
Now, it sounds like some don't respect Envirotech's position on this. That's fine. Give us the path forward so that we know where we're going and how to get this done. Because again, I want to budget it this year for the accretion project. But if there's certain things holding us back, if there's certain things holding someone or more commissioners back, then help us with an outline. And what can we do to set some path forward with this? Anybody over here first? We'll come back to you, Commissioner LeGree.
I just want to make one comment, which is, you know, in looking at this thing from the lens of an ongoing project for the last 15 years or whatever it's been, but there's also I perceive at least that there's a lot more external forces changing in that time period that were not the same throughout, let's say, Ms. Cole's experience, the least of which is how much, you know, construction we've had in the last several years. You know, much more disturbed earth has occurred. More drastic weather events have occurred. There's a lot. So I'm just saying the background is not the same. I think the background has changed, and I think we need to adapt our plan to address these things. So that's really what I'm saying.
You refer to the 80 by 50 section of zoning. Is that all within city-owned land?
That is unknown by me, but I do not think that it is. Some people do own out into the lake.
Okay. And if we were to, which I support going forward with a demucking project, is there any time of the year environmentally that is better to do it than not? And then if you could estimate how long the dewatering project would take from start to finish?
Yeah, great question. We recommend the winter months due to the less people around, and we don't have the sun and heat that would provide. There's going to be a lot of adverse effects once we liberate all this nutrient, start removing the material. Things are going to float out, dissolved phosphorus and nitrogen. We don't want to jump right into a massive algae bloom that we're pumping things into, you know, control. We want to try to prevent that as much. So the winter months are the preferred time.
And time frame from start to finish?
Time frame is about 14 days to get the mucking done. The dewatering process, I would estimate at about a month.
And the dewatering would be done on site there?
On site, yeah. We would create chambers where the existing swing set is, and then rebuild that back, the barriers and the mulching, and just put the swing set back in.
And then a discussion about the trees falling in off of private property and what have you. How much ability do we have, I look to the solicitor on this, for management of private property. I know, certainly DENREC has a sediment and stormwater management program, and we know in the state of Maryland with the Chesapeake Bay watershed that it affects private property. Is there an ability that we as a city can also motivate or have some say in how the banks of that property are maintained to in fact maintain the health of the lake and for the good of the whole?
It's a good question. I don't know that I don't believe that the new revisions to the tree ordinance address that head on. I know Liz has worked with those property owners with those particular trees, and there's been some open discussion about how best to manage them. But certainly once the tree comes over the lake and is affecting the lake, we do have some ability to get involved at that point. When it's completely on private property, we have very little ability, I think, at this point to affect what's done there, other than through conversations with the city arborist.
Thank you.
I'd like, because that's one of the two criteria we talked about, I'd like to direct right now the city solicitor to look into that further for us. Okay.
Yep.
The timing's apropos, especially if it would be within the tree code. Commissioner Legree?
Commissioner Gossett has the right idea. We have a lake that's sick, and it's not because of the water, it's because of the area around it that erodes into the lake, the trees fall into the lake, and we're just not doing any outreach. We just keep coming back year after year, and this just keeps getting worse. And now if we read the comprehensive development plan, we need to have a comprehensive stormwater plan, and that includes the periphery of the lake. And I agree with Commissioner Sharp. It's not two things. It's a comprehensive lake management plan that's part of our stormwater plan. And just thinking about the water is not going to do it. It's like putting a Band-Aid on a broken leg. You got to stop the bleeding before you go in there and start sucking. An entire lake silted in.
Well, again, I'd like to put this in the budget. And so I would hope that before we get to that conversation and anybody negates it, that you bring forward some possible paths so that we can address them ahead of time. Anybody else?
Mayor, just for clarity,
ma'am.
when you say put it in the budget, are you talking about the removal of the debris from the West Prong, or are you talking a broader statement?
Well, initially, what you talk about is remediation of the accretion.
Right.
So is it called dredging? Is that appropriate? It's on a small scale dredging, yes. But also any amendments to that we want to put in there need to be funded also. That if we, this creation of a amendment to the tree code that requires lakeside owners to, that really is nothing to fund. But if there's something else that we need to do, restoration of does the dredging fees that you gave us earlier include rebuilding of any of the four bays or the piping in there?
Just the discharge pipe. We have a line item in there to replace the flared end of or actually replace the pipe with a concrete flared end to the drain inlet right there.
Okay, so
playground
there's something that's already funded within the accretion remediation project, but we're liable to find other things too.
And Mayor, I think it is in the capital improvement plan for FY24.
That doesn't mean it'll be in the budget.
Right.
So if I could, is it the consensus of the commissioners that to request that the city manager, interim city manager, take this information to be a part of the upcoming budget for the plan just described so that we can evaluate it properly during the budgeting time?
Yes.
And I'll have a lot to say about the accretion project when we talk about budgeting.
Just the concept of bringing it forward so that it is budgeted.
But again, I'm asking you to please do that in as far in advance as possible so that we can try to address some of those things.
But if we could follow the model that the city manager currently uses of bringing each department head in to discuss their budgets, this could also fall into that format that perhaps Mayor, you and Commissioner Legreese, who have a lot of information on this, could sit down with the city manager to discuss, perhaps with Mr. Fritchman or others, to work those details out, to come forward with a specific plan during the budget so that we don't have to hash it out during the budget, that it can be a concise, formatted plan at that time.
That's a good plan. Is there any other comments by the commissioner? Go ahead.
I just have a quick clarification. If we move forward with this dredging project, Mr. Fritchman, how long would you say that would last?
Probably, I would say 50 to 60 years. You mean how long before you have to dredge it again?
Yes.
Yep, maybe 50 to 60 years.
Okay.
If you read about...
Remember, we are doing a little better in the stormwater management, the requiring the silt fences, right? We do that, or the choir logs around the catch basins. So we are advancing this a little bit.
I mean, just the west prong, I'm sorry to jump in, just the west prong, I'm only referring to that 80 by 50 foot
And I
zone.
guess I'm perplexed only because I do not recall the West Prong looking that way other than within the last 12 years.
Because, yeah, you're right, it had to
Okay.
fill up first. It took history for it to fill up.
Okay.
So it had to fill up. Now that it's full, there's a surface organic layer that you see. We couldn't see it before because
Okay.
it was subaqueous. It was below the surface, and now that it's full.
Okay, thank you.
And the reality is, there has been a lot of development on that West Prom. Just in the
Two
past,
motels,
just,
yep.
yeah, just in the past 10 years.
I have photographs of 34 Virginia where they just gouged out a lot behind Mrs. Cole's house, and that all went into the lake. There must be 20 yards of dirt that found its way into the lake. And she was telling us that they had gouged it out. There were tree roots showing. I went over and took photographs. And the muck back there, you could walk in the muck. I have pictures of me standing in the muck. And that all came down the hill and went into the lake. It went into those buffers and extended the buffers right out into the lake.
Not to open another can of worms, but has there been any investigation into the east prong of the lake? I mean, that has similar situations of trees, private property. Are we looking at that, or is that just not on the horizon, or?
The east prong is under the same situation. It is accreted and formed a bog. The bottom has come to the top in the east, but that hasn't generated any complaints because it's 100% forested all the way around it.
Okay.
So this, just so everyone understands, this is a natural process that happens on all isolated freshwater bodies. All freshwater bodies. It's aquatic succession. It's the most fundamental environmental concept that there is.
I certainly don't want to, I was going to say bog down, that's the wrong term, but
going
to delay this, but I think that in the future, we should also consider that east prong just to get an evaluation of it. You're right, it's all around private property, so people are not complaining about it as much, but that doesn't mean it doesn't need attention. And this perhaps is where we can look at more involvement from private property owners for the quality of the health of the lake and the good of the whole.
Thank you. So let's define the east prong. You're talking about the area behind the DuPont house, not the easternmost part of the lake.
It's
the
a northeast prong.
Northwest
north,
prong.
northwest, northeast.
Okay.
Northwest
Well,
prong.
I think we have a path forward that offered by Commissioner Gossett, so we'll work together on it. I would like to go to the public. Go ahead. Jay, do you have?
I'm good.
I would like to go, let me go to the, I'm gonna do the others first, and then I'll come to you, Kitty. Hoyt, you want to come up to the standing microphone, please? Identify yourself and your relationship to the city, please.
Burt Decker, I live on Laurel Street. I come here for one issue, and then you guys start talking about another issue, and you get me all pumped up. It strikes me, or at least from what I'm hearing, it sounds kind of like the barn door is open. What is the percentage, maybe just the West Prong, what is the percentage of private property versus city property along that portion?
Along just the West Prong?
Yeah.
50,
I mean, if it's not, 50?
50-50 approximately on that west prong, yes.
That sounds like an awful lot to me. It just seems to me that, well, let me ask you another question. The city council, the city attorney has mentioned there's been some contact. Liz Lingo apparently is out there. That's good. My question is there contact with the property owners? Is there any attempt to cajole them into going along with maybe some of these projects? Or is, I forget who it was, maybe it was Mr. Gossett, suggested that, maybe there's some other arm twisting kind of things that might happen to make this a possibility. Can you address that?
Well, essentially, we agree with you that we haven't made contact with those. Yes, it's time to talk with those property owners, but beforehand, we need the city solicitor to do some research on what our capabilities are legislatively.
Yeah. Sweet talk followed by the baseball bat. So, all right, thank you.
Carolyn and then Bitsy, your name and relationship to the city, please.
Carolyn Diefendorfer, city resident. As I sit here and listen to this, the lake is the lake, and we need that piece to be done. And to Jay's point, the park around it needs work. That slope needs work. But I believe the park falls under Liz. So we need Liz to hear some of this and redo that bank so that it's not exposed dirt that can run into the lake. So I think that's getting that prong taken care of is a piece of it. But getting the park taken care of is another part to this whole thing. The other thing I'll mention is I believe in the code there is a provision that says property owners have to keep their property neat. So if a tree falls down, they in theory need to take care of it, but it's a matter of enforcing that. And we've heard that meeting after meeting that we need ways to better enforce our codes, and that's part of it. So thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. Bitsy? State your name and identify yourself, please.
My name is Bitsy Cochran. I live at 36 Olive Avenue. I was raised at 45 Olive Avenue, and I was literally raised in the lake by my brother, toted around where he went, I went. Unlike Kitty, I've not been here for 65 years, Kitty. You've got me beat, but she's been a good neighbor. And she and I have the same feeling about the lake. To Hoyt's point, though, first, did we question the homeowners that lived around Silver Lake when we dredged that back there behind the school a few years ago? We didn't ask them anything about it. They wanted it done. And I think the residents here, we want this done. There is a buildup of silt. There used to be a dock, probably you all don't know that. Remember, the Tubbses had a little dock for the rowboat. We had a rowboat. We used to go out in this area, and you could row around, and we could fish and turtle and everything. There was one storm drain at that time, and it came in from straight back right by the swings. And you've since added additional storm drains. And it needs to be done. It looks horrible. It's in the long-range plan that we're supposed to protect the lakes. It needs to be done. Just bite the bullet and come up with a plan and do it. The other thing is Stan was always the first to get the call when I would notice something. But I don't know, maybe how long ago that they sandblasted, power blasted the pool up at the breakers. You want to prevent something? They sandblasted a pool up at the breakers, and it all drained into the lake. All that chip paint that remember that, Stan? And we couldn't do a thing about it. This whole lake was just covered in white from the chips from the pool. Prevent that. Come up with codes that prevents that from happening. I understand that they let the pools in all the areas, the pools that are privately owned, drain onto the lakes when they need to do it, and it goes into, and I understand that. That's what you allow. But certainly, when they sandblast pools like that, they should have some kind of filter system that goes before it goes into the lake. So, but you guys need to come up with something. How long have we been asking and saying something needs to be done? I'm a witness to it. I have seen it change. We used to have a beautiful lake back there. There were some beautiful hollyhocks or whatever along the edge there, which my mother fell into the lake trying to catch once. It was beautifully landscaped and done, but there's been no maintenance to it. I know. I got film of me as a toddler with geese running all around and wildlife everywhere, and there used to be the ability to walk right onto the lake and go skating and to go fishing and all. Now you can't do that. I understand we have to have the buffers. Okay, we lost that. But if it helps the lakes, I'm for whatever will protect the lakes.
Thank you, Betsy. I'd like to direct the city manager's second task is look into how to resolve or prevent any of the pool situation. I'd also like to direct the interim city manager to look into that, because what that means is that a swimming pool is emptying into our storm drains, and we need to be able to have an eye on that. Next, would you like to give one more time?
I'd like to ask Todd, why the buffer?
She can't hear, so she.
Oh, why the buffer is the question? So around the perimeter of the lake, because water wicks up into the soil. It wicks into the soil and creates a wetland status zone where the soils are, they're soupy soil. So if you mow those areas, if you mow those areas, then the tires rut the soil, they smooth the soil, they displace the vegetative ground.
It's beautiful. There was no problem down there.
Kitty, let him finish, please.
No worries. So if you disturb those soils, okay, and you don't have the roots holding the soils in place, then they're exposed to raindrop and sheet flow energy of moving water through the watershed. And then that transports the soil into the lake, okay? So it is a best management practice for all waterway management, not because I say so. It's because all science from every regulatory agency, from the Department of Agriculture to the EPA to our Department of Natural Resource Environmental Control, all of these agencies said put the buffers in, even larger. And so we had to make them smaller to conform to the human psychology component of this. So the buffers have sediment erosion control, habitat. They buffer the pond from the inflowing silts and sediments, as we've witnessed. It blocks that material from going in. So they're a constant functional piece of lake management best practice.
Well, what I don't understand, for years, we had no problem. And I thought that you put the buffer there to keep the wildlife from coming. It stopped the wildlife. I thought that was what you said it was for. I have a book from Solar 3 where you commented that you did not want the geese in the lake, and that buffer was for that reason.
Hey, can I just say one, thank you. This doesn't have anything to do with me. It's not Todd Fritchman, I'm not the one that has done all this. This is a collective
I think what we
piece.
found out is, we just heard that there's scientific reason for buffers. They're endorsed by many, many different agencies. And unfortunately, Kitty, that we're not going back to green grass all the way up to the edge anymore. No.
There's grass on Silver Lake.
In locations where there's private property, there is, but on city property, it will always be a buffer.
It was a beautiful area until you put the buffer, and for 100 years, that lake's been really a pretty area, and I have pictures here showing.
No, I understand. And we appreciate.
Why do we have to have a buffer full of all kinds of things, and no one, it's kind of sad. I have pictures of her when she was a little girl playing along the lake right here. It's just awful to think that you can change things within the last 10 years from all the years that I've lived here 100 years almost. And
Literally, yeah.
Put a buffer there to happiness of the people that live along the lake. Okay, I move on.
Okay. Thank you, Kitty. Thank you for coming. Is there anything before we close this topic today?
Mayor, could I just ask Todd to explain why the Canadian geese are problematic and why we try to keep them at bay?
Yeah, at one time, I believe we had over 6,000, 7,000 permanent resident Canada geese, along with ornamental geese, the Peking duck, I can't remember all the different species, the big white swan, there was so many. We were harboring ornamental duck species as well as a resident bird population 24/7 year-round. And okay, barnyard geese. Yes. Okay. So that volume we basically ended up with a concentrated animal feeding operation. We had a concentrated animal feeding operation. So to put this in perspective, if they were turkeys or chickens, they would have been regulated, and you would have had to have a nutrient management plan and a control program in place through the Department of Agriculture. Because these are wildlife, there is no regulation other than the recommendations from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the State of Delaware Division of Fish and Wildlife, and others on controlling these geese because they all produce wastes. So that fecal coliform that was spoken of earlier is bird excrement. That's where it comes from. It comes from their lower colon when they discharge their waste into the water. Out comes E. coli and fecal coliform, which saturates the water column, and it out falls into the ocean where it's captured on testing. The other thing was the herbivory. Because they are herbivores and they graze on grass and aquatic vegetation 24/7, 365, they had defoliated the perimeter of the lake. And the defoliation is all captured in images. I can send the image around. Top right-hand corner, if you don't mind, shows the condition at the time of the grant implementation. There was no vegetation around the lake in majority of the parts. So a rule of thumb on a sustainable community or sustainable municipality is to reduce your exposed soil inventory to as little as possible so that you don't have erosion and movement of silts and sediments into systems like this. So the purpose was clear: to stabilize all the soils, prevent herbivory, to improve water quality, to improve the bacterial contamination from the fecal deposits that occurred. Each bird is about 2 pounds per day. You multiply that by 5,000, that tells you how many pounds of fecal matter was being deposited into the lake on a daily basis. So that was the reason. We have been very successful with that. I think now we have 6 resident birds, resident Canada geese, using the system, and we are monitoring their reproduction as part of the maintenance and management plan. And we have things in place to control that if indeed we collaborate and determine it to be necessary.
Thank you very much. With that, we're going to conclude this discussion. Thank you, Todd. Appreciate your time. We'll be in touch with you. Thank you, Katie. With that, the next item of business, old business, is B, discuss recommendations from Street and Transportation Committee specific to the 300 block of Munson Street, which is the segments between Country Club Drive, intended to increase visualization, reduce traffic speed, and deter unsafe passing. Four recommendations were brought forward by the Street and Transportation Committee to one of the last workshops. Unfortunately, it was only delivered to us that very day, and we did not have any time to discuss it, so that is the purpose of discussion today. There were 4 things that were brought forward. I'm going to let Ed explain each one of those. Just follow the agenda, Ed.
Yeah, sure.
And if you would give a brief synopsis of what the whys and how you came about deciding these. And the goal today is to let members of the public speak and say something, but additionally, to allow the commissioners to be able to give guidance to the city manager on whether to move forward or not with all, any, or some of the bullet points, recommendations, as well as to fund any of these in the future. Ed?
Thanks,
I'm
Mayor.
sorry, and I did want to recognize correspondence from Hoyt Decker. We have that, it's embedded in the agenda. And Hoyt makes some good points in that he actually conferred directly with, I think, DelDOT, and got some recommendations on how to reduce the speed limit. And out of that, thank you, our city manager and public works director. We'll be talking with those folks very soon, within the next day or so. So that put us on that avenue to look at that. Ed, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mayor. One thing I want to mention, that this, the 300 block of Munson Street is a little different than many other streets in Rehoboth. It is much wider than other streets, and because of the through traffic coming off of State Road, it's been used a lot more, especially now that there's Google Maps and Waze that directs people to use streets that are a little less known to people. So the committee has recommended 4 things. To install 2 speed limit signs at the beginning of each side of the 300 block. Currently, there are no speed limit signs on that block. To paint a double yellow line in the middle of the street. That would create, visually, it slows traffic and is a traffic calming effect. Paint driveway blocks on that block. That too has the same effect. It's known to calm traffic visually. And then to install a freestanding speed radar sign in the middle of the block in each direction. They have been placed on other streets in Rehoboth and have done a good job at slowing speeds of vehicles down. So those are the 4 recommendations by the committee. And it's the committee's hope that we would give the approval for the city manager to just start implementing some of these things as soon as possible.
Ed, in Rockville, Maryland, and elsewhere, if I recall correctly, they have had similar problem with speeding traffic through neighborhoods. And they have installed these I don't know how to describe it. It's not a roundabout because if it would be a micro mini roundabout, and it just makes you do enough of this to slow you down. I don't know what the name of it, but did you all investigate anything like that?
We talked about bump outs, I think at one of the meetings. And there were several other recommendations that Chris Galanti, who is an expert in this area with a consulting firm who lives on that block, provided recommendations. And we only adopted or recommended that this body adopt sort of 4 of the things that can be done quickly and cheaply, and seeing the effects that would have before considering some other recommendations.
All right, sounds good. I'm not referring to bump outs. There's another name for it. I'll figure it out. But okay, so these are the 4. And did you read what the 4 recommendations are?
I did.
Okay. So with that,
Driveway blocks.
And what is that?
Those are just the yellow boxes around driveways.
Gotcha.
It serves a purpose that people don't block someone's driveway, but it also has a calming effect for people visually.
so if we can, before we go to the commissioners, let's just go to the city manager and ask him to review these 4 bullets and be able to give us the logistics of them. Does he need to wait for them to be funded in the budget. I would think at least the speed radar sign might be, but how about the other 4 items there?
Sure, thank you, Mayor. So what I would recommend is that the speed radar signs, painting of the driveway blocks, and painting of the double yellow lines wait until our new fiscal year. That would enable us to budget those items and then possibly incorporate some of those painting items into a contract that we would look to enter into for other citywide painting. Installing just the speed limit signs, I think could be something that we could do prior to the end of the fiscal year. But certainly I think we could work towards, if not completing these prior to next summer, doing so shortly after the start of the summer.
So essentially, fund most of these things, put them in the budget starting April 1st, which would let you realize them essentially before summer starts. And so I think that sounds like a good deal to me. Anybody up here have any comments? Anybody, members of the public, like to say anything? Hoyt, come on up and, again, identify yourself in relationship to the city. Yeah, you can stand up there if you like. Just pull that microphone close to you if you would.
Hoyt Decker, still live on Laurel Street. So I'm fully supportive of what Mr. Galante recommended to the city, to the Streets and Transportation Committee. There's a couple items I think that he mentioned. The one that I would point out that I don't know has gotten consideration other than, you spoke about bump outs and you're speaking about painting the no parking yellow lines in there. And that would be diminishing or narrowing the street, the traffic lanes. I think that's a significant way to slow the traffic down. I don't know about bicycle lanes. I don't know. I seem to recall there may have been some discussion by the committee of that issue. I think that would certainly narrow the lanes down a little bit, but I don't know where that went. I'm sneaking in here, forgive me, because several years ago, at least 2 years ago, I communicated with the city about my concerns about speeding generally in residential areas of the city. And I communicated with I guess it was the current mayor at the time, and the council about my concerns. And I got a response back, but I really didn't get what I felt was any significant movement on my concerns. So I went out. One of the things that the mayor mentioned at the outset of this was that I've communicated with DelDOT. I've also communicated with some other people. Specifically, there's an ad hoc committee in Milton, Delaware, that has studied this issue with some depth. The councilwoman's name is Randy Meredith. And their concerns, or their goal, actually, I'd like to state kind of what she said. I think it's significant. And that is shift priorities from convenience of drivers to a focus on the quality of life of the residents. I think that's really at the heart of what I'm suggesting here. They did issue a report. It's online. I've communicated that to the mayor in response to some questions he raised with me. I can make it available, or maybe he can with the rest of the commission. I think it's worth a read. Some of the things that are in it is and I believe, Stan, you've actually had some background on this some years ago too, and that is addressing concerns by municipalities about the 25 mile an hour, what they call state statutory speed limit. And the way that works is if it's a state road, it's a state-controlled road, the minimum speed would only be 25 miles an hour. And I think that's one of the recommendations they were suggesting as well. Here's another idea that I think is useful and maybe worth considering, and that is having raised crosswalks, and maybe not on street ends, but maybe in the middle of a block. And so, for example, on Munson Street, if you had, I forget what is it, Sandalwood or something that comes in somewhere along the line there, there's a stop sign. And by the way, that stop sign it's not functioning too well because there's a lot of construction work going on in that area, and there's big trucks parked there, and you don't even see the stop sign. So some people are going right on through it. But anyway, that would be a good location to have a raised crosswalk. And if, in effect, what that does is it slows you. It's not a speed bump, but it acts like a speed bump. It slows you down, makes you, take notice of the fact that there's a crosswalk there. So that's one item on that. Stan mentioned Rockville. One of the things that I also found was, and I've got a reference for this, the Montgomery County Council actually instituted a pilot program, and I'm sorry, I don't know what the status of it is now. That was actually a couple of years ago. But their goal in stating the issue was 20 is plenty, and I kind of like that. I like 15 is plenty even better. But it's a concept worth thinking about. Before I got up here the other day, I was talking to my son-in-law, and he said, if you have a 25-mile-an-hour speed limit, they're not doing 25 miles an hour, but if you make it a 15-mile-an-hour speed limit, maybe they'll only get 25 miles. Okay, so that's something to think about in terms of that. Bicycles. Jay, did you ride your bike today?
Yeah.
All right.
I take Munson, by the way.
I did. Huh?
And,
yeah, I do too.
And the bump outs would kill me. I'd be dead by the week.
All right, I got you. Well, anyway, I rode my bike too. And it's great. I'm loving the people. They're schlepping all their gear. They got their beach towels and their beach umbrellas and all that stuff, and they're probably killing themselves riding that bike because they haven't done that in 14 years or whatever. But anyway, they're out there. They're an issue, and we're helping them because we're putting out signs about, you can ride your bike down the street right in the middle, and God knows what happens then. But anyway, so it's something that has to be taken into consideration. When you're saying people are going 25 miles an hour and you're bicycling down that same street, it could be an issue. All right, I'm almost done. So we need to do something. We need to do something more than just on Munson Street. Munson Street, definitely. But we also need to give some consideration to all of the other streets. Maybe a study. Maybe conduct some traffic surveys. You could start on Laurel.
Third block of Laurel.
Whatever. I like to call it the second, but anyway. So anyway, after you've done some of that stuff, maybe you give some consideration to taking some action. And with all due respect, Chief, maybe a little enforcement might help too. Thank you.
Thank you, Hoyt. Walter, you want to speak? Come on up.
Walter Birmingham, 123 Hennepin Avenue. We keep kicking the bucket down the street. You could take Street and Transportation Committee agendas from a couple years ago and bring them forward, and they would still be concurrent today. I don't understand why you just can't simply say authorize by vote to the city manager to put the speed limit signs up. They're not like a stop sign, though. The stop sign's got a sign to it, a fine to it. But you don't wait till the middle of summer to do something. A stopping point is the budget. So you have less cars parked on the street of the area that we're talking about this time of year, so it promulgates speeding. So you could get Straight Line Incorporated or one of the firms that's available to the city through the state, et cetera, to run their truck right down the center of the street and paint the 2 lines and be done with it. Well, why do you have to wait till the cars start coming? Because when you talk about the time the budget goes into effect, you only have a month and a half, and you're basically in high summer. So why are we waiting to do stuff later? Why don't we get it done now? If you say you don't have the money to do it, the city had a $65,000 Bobcat. They parked it up on the ocean front for weeks. They're not designed to be left up on top of the sand dune. If we can waste money like that, we can go out and paint the lines down the street and get rid of some of these projects before the key time of the year. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Yes, that man just spoke common sense.
Well, how about coming up to the microphone, giving your name, if you would?
My name's Ray Ayub. I live on Munson, and that man just spoke common sense. You're going to wait till April, summertime. You can at least paint 2 lines down the middle of the road. That should do hopefully that will do a lot.
Very good. Thank you very much. Chris, you want to say something? Identify yourself and your relationship to the city, please.
Okay. Hello. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Chris Galanti, and I live at 327 Munson Street. My husband and James, have been homeowners since 2018, and by way of introduction, I hold a master's in urban planning with a concentration in transportation planning from the University of Virginia. I am employed by a government consultancy, Booz Allen Hamilton, and I serve as our account manager for the Environmental Protection Agency. I want to first thank Mayor Mills, Commissioner Krasnowski, and Chief Banks for their ongoing partnership in bringing awareness and temporary support in the form of patrols and a mobile speed reader to mitigate the ongoing vehicular traffic, speeding, reckless driving, and corresponding pedestrian safety issues around the 300 block of Munson. Ironically, you would think this issue would be a bigger problem in the summer with the rise of population and the guests and visitors, but in my estimation, it's a bigger issue in the off-season. There are less cars parked on the street, less people walking up to Rise and Egg. The result is people use the block as a speedway to get in and out of the city. We need relief, and everyone who lives on the block with whom I have spoken with agrees. The Streets and Transportation Committee held 2 hearings this past summer in June and July, and during that time, the city received letters and testimony that detail the problem from the residents of the block. A couple of data points. Chief Banks helped us by having a device installed on a light monitor to monitor traffic. During the 4 days in May of 2022 that it was up, there were over 10,201 cars and trucks that were recorded down our block. Some cars were clocked at 44 miles per hour, nearly twice the posted speed limit. We have had many documented incidents of westbound cars going the speed limit that were passed. Okay, let's think about it, right? It's 1 block, and there are cars that are going the speed limit, 25 miles per hour, and the person who is coming up behind them is frustrated and has passed them on the left. And we have many, many incidents of it. I've witnessed it. The Ayubs have witnessed it. Diana Jones has got a Ring camera. She's got scores of documents or files that document this. We've also had a number of accidents. There have been, in the last 6 months, there have been 3 accidents at the intersection of State Road and Munson. There also was a hit and run on the intersection of Country Club and Munson where a bicyclist was hit. So the recommendations that were passed by the Streets and Transportation Committee, I think, are just a start. When I did my original testimony, I broke my recommendations into short and long-term recommendations. These 4 are short-term recommendations, ones that we think can be easily recommended to help mitigate what we're experiencing right now. The long-term recommendations include the bump outs, rotaries, speed humps. The point was made by Ed at the beginning that Munson is wider than most of the streets in the city. Just to put it into the record, the width of Munson from Country Club to Country Club is 38 feet. All of the other streets in Country Club Estates are 32 feet wide. So I am thrilled and pleased that this is seeming to get attention and traction, but I would also implore you to act upon these recommendations and pass them so that we can get relief before the start of the next summer.
Thank you, Chris. Anybody else like to speak?
I would.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm just curious, what is it that prevents us from doing this prior to April? What I'm looking at here is paint and some signs. What am I missing? Somebody help me.
So we can certainly do it prior to April, Commissioner. It was just in terms of painting, because of the amount of painting that has to be done. We were looking to include it in a contract that we typically do prior to the start of the summer for crosswalks and some other things. So if the desire amongst the commissioners is to try and do this before April, we can do that.
Well, I'll put it this way. To me, it's more important to me to have it more convenient and safe for the residents than convenient for the city.
Sure.
So if anybody else shares that,
I would like to echo that as well.
that would be great. If not, your silence is agreement.
No, I agree. That's not fair.
No, it wasn't, was it?
Go ahead,
I
Brian.
tried very hard, Edward.
I agree with you, Commissioner, and I have another question. I agree with all the residents. Are we going to have, I know we talked about a traffic study, but I do agree that I've been passed on Baltimore Avenue. People have tried to pass me on other streets in town. The speeding's gotten out of control in town, and I think we really do need to look at our speed limits overall in the city.
Thank you.
If I can just respond.
Go ahead, and then Commissioner Legree.
So the other 4 long-term recommendations that Chris mentioned he made to the Streets and Transportation Committee, as well as some of the things that Hoyt has addressed, the Streets and Transportation Committee is recommending, I don't have it in writing yet for this board, but they will be recommending that we do a comprehensive plan addressing many of the things that were discussed by Chris and Hoyt for the next fiscal year. So I just want to say that is on the radar.
Would that be part of the overall, I know we talked about one with parking and traffic. Would that be part of the whole thing? Do we envision that?
I think we previously talked about parking. It would be the Streets and Transportation recommendation that we include a comprehensive traffic.
For the whole city?
Right,
thank you.
Included in that.
I mean, I've been asking for that for months now to be included in the budget.
I thought we already agreed on that.
I thought so too.
And it came from Commissioner Gossett. Did I miss something?
No.
So are we working on that now, or are we waiting for something? We're working, Evan?
We're working on it, Commissioner.
Okay, so is that something that we should be able to have going on in the next, 30, 60, 90, 3,000 days? What would it be?
Well, isn't that something that needs to go over summertime so that we could accurately
But
capture the summer traffic?
I just mean getting a vendor on board and ready to go.
Yeah.
When would that
An
happen?
RFP out or RFQ so that we know what we're asking for. And also following up on that, I think, we're currently painting parking lines, parking street lines, if you will, to delineate parking spaces along 4th Street, Rehoboth Avenue, whatever. Is that a contractor or is that in-house?
That's in-house.
In-house. Do we not then have the ability to paint yellow lines down Munson?
Well, again, he was citing the economy, that we save money by doing it that way.
But
We
to me,
certainly
life
do it
and
ourselves.
not liberty, life and the protection of safety on the streets is more important than that. And also, I question, I saw here of the long term, but I know 4 years ago now, sort of overnight, this traffic control speed hump appeared on Columbia Avenue. And it's...
Where? Do you know where?
Yeah, like
Right near that Prince Motel.
Yeah, the former Prince.
Yeah.
Right. And it's not an asphalt, as a man-made or asphalt that was, but it's rubberized. Other than it got hit by a snowplow, it has survived very well over the 4 years. I don't know if that's something that can be investigated. It's relatively a quick fix. It's not that you have to contract with it. It's an installation by an outside contractor, and that was done by the city manager on request from residents there. So I would ask also that, Evan, if you could check into that, since we have had a previous purchase on that, we've got some kind of track record as to what to look, just to see if that's a possibility. And I'd also would like to say, I mean, we've had a lot of conversation about the 300 block of Munson, but I think we also need to address the whole Munson 200 block of Munson. In August, we received a very detailed letter from one of the residents on the 200 block of Munson about traffic, delivery trucks, lawn and leaf trucks, landscape people parking, what have you. So to look at both blocks there, I think is what should be done. And if we're doing a comprehensive study, or just, if you will, a quick fix with a speed bump and paint some yellow lines in the second 200 and 300 block of Munson. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Commissioner. I'm all for this, frankly, but I have always issued a caution to the chief of police and the city manager on doing these things, that we have to check with the property owners and try to get their buy-in the best we can. By example, there aren't very many people that want a speed bump in front of their house because they're noisy. You've got the car braking, you've got them going over the bump, you've got them accelerating. Some don't even brake, they just accelerate and go over it, and they're noisy. The one on Columbia is installed 2 or 3 doors down from the guy that requested it. You know, you got the same thing with the radar signs. We've installed those before. And the people have been incredibly unhappy, and we've had to move them at great expense because we didn't do a good enough job vetting it with the people. Why? Because those things have lights, and in the middle of the night, those things blink, and they blink right into your house while you're trying to watch TV, so you've got to keep... So I would charge the chair of the Street and Transportation Committee to work with chief of police and the town manager to make sure that these places are vetted. You know, I don't know whether they're going to go in front of anybody here, their house on Munson Street, or if they're unwilling to do that, if they are willing to put them in front of their neighbor's house. But there's something we need to consider. Absolutely. Commissioner Legree, you had a
No,
comment?
Patrick asked the question that I was going to ask.
So what I'm hearing is we'd like to direct the city manager to proceed faster than originally anticipated with all these projects if possible. Is that characterized all right?
Yes.
All right.
Yes, and if we could have a report back at the next workshop on the actions taken.
And Mayor, if I could just mention that we did talk about, in the committee, we did talk about the speed bumps, the pros and cons of those, and I do believe they do work well in some areas. We did not feel as a committee that it was best suited for that Munson Street. And we did hear from almost everyone on the block, and there was overwhelming support of any of these recommendations they would be fine with if it was in front of or close by their homes.
Well, Ed, as chair of the Street and Transportation Committee, I'd like to make a suggestion that I think that would benefit us in the future, and that's a more comprehensive report. Tell us about what you recommend now, and if there are future steps, let us know that, because we may choose to implement something different or more complete or whatever. And I think that would be helpful to us to have a more complete package. So you're good there. Anything else?
Yes, as a follow-up to that, if we could also then incorporate some type of evaluation of this, that we implement these, whatever we decide to implement and how quickly, but in 90 days or as the season starts or mid-season, if we could ask a report back from the residents of Munson Street, are these effective? Is it working? You know, is there something more needs to be done, or have we answered the needs there? So I would think that we could evaluate it so that we know what we're doing, and perhaps if some of those work, we could apply those in other parts of the city.
Sure, and part of the report, which I provided at the last meeting, the follow-up is going to get feedback from the residents as well as the chief and his staff on any information that he can provide as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. With that, we'll close this topic. Thank you very much for everybody that spoke. We'll move on to the next item of old business. Discuss fee structure and policy objectives for issuance of license agreements authorizing encroachment of structure into the city right-of-way, including consideration of setting an administrative fee of $325, an annual administrative fee of $30, and introduction of draft guidelines. Pretty much, I don't know that we need to spend much time on this. And if you could put the screen on for me, please. You'll recall that there's a support document originally presented September 6th at a meeting, version dated September 2nd, that gives you the background on license agreements and how we need to take a look at these, that there's no consistency or formula for fees, et cetera. Beyond that, we've already discussed that at the next voting meeting, we will consider increasing the fees to $325 and an annual fee of $30 for administrating the fee on an annual basis. So we've already talked about that multiple times. What I wanted to do today, as I had said at the last meeting, I would present some guidelines. And these guidelines are not a policy. They're intended just for us, especially for anybody new coming on that's new to license agreements, but for those with experience also, to be able to analyze incoming license agreement applications with respect to the different items that are in there. This document is embedded in the agenda. I think my intent, again, is just to use it as a guideline for the commissioners in approaching the next evaluation of a license agreement. It's not set as a policy. It certainly could be, but that would resolve in some more conversation. And this could also be included with future license agreement applications if we chose, so that the applicant has an idea of what we're thinking about as a possibility. So I'm throwing it out there, and if anybody has anything they want to add to it or edit or something, then it doesn't necessarily need to be now, but you could let me know and we can add it in there. Any questions?
Mayor, this was a subject brought up back in 2018 by myself, and I'm glad to see it back and kind of back on the front burner. The only concern that I have is just that, and I know we disagree on this point, but the fact that the permit, if you will, to encroach goes with the land. I just think that it should go with, if there's a change in ownership, it should be reinvestigated and looked at a second time. A lot of things change, codes change, needs of the community change, and I'm not saying that it would cease to operate when a property ownership changes, but that this would be a time to just reevaluate to see if the same situations exist or something has changed. That's my only caveat to what you've presented.
Well, how about we add something in there, put this in there that, as an additional consideration, evaluate with respect to when the license terminates. That's essentially it.
Yeah, something of that nature, because I just think this is, some of these are...
Again, this is not to be a policy, it's to be our guidelines, so.
And that guideline would be used by whom?
By commissioners that are evaluating.
So that, just kind of following this through here, so that if an individual comes and wants to establish a new encroachment, how would this start? Would they go directly to the mayor, directly to building and licensing, kind of what's the process? Do we have one?
What's the process now, Glenn? Is there an actual application for license agreements?
Not, Mayor. So they come into us in different ways. Sometimes it's through the building and licensing process. There might be a project proposed that, for example, when Clear Space was considering, they were going to use some of the public space, and that came in through building and licensing. Other times, typically when it's an existing encroachment, I've seen letters written to the mayor asking the mayor to put it on an agenda. So they can come in multiple different ways. But I think this would be a good item to add to your policy, simply because some of the encroachments are simple. That might be like a awning or something that is easily removable at the time that the property changes hands. Other encroachments might be something more substantial, and people aren't going to spend the kind of money that would require to do the encroachment without knowing that it's going to be able to transfer with the property. So that, I think it's a good policy, one more factor to consider when you have one of these licenses come before you. And some would make sense to terminate them with the transfer. And
Just
some
an
would.
opportunity to reevaluate.
Right.
Well, and so let me go back. I mentioned that this guideline could also be included with the license application. Well, if they write to us, right now there is no application. Right. So if they write to us, then this would behoove whoever receives it to have to send them back an acknowledgement with the guidelines. Alternatively, should we create a license agreement application?
My perspective on that is, and you're the ones with the votes, so I mean, this is just my perspective, is I don't think you should do anything that encourages people to seek use of city land. I mean, city land, they're not making any more of it. So if you have an application out there, to me, that suggests to the public that city land is available for your use if you make application. So I would just sort of caution against it.
So I will maintain the status quo then and everything. We've got a lot of license agreements coming up. As I mentioned earlier, we've got a lot of housekeeping to do, that there are some that we're discovered that we've lost the application, so we need to hear them. But also, if you look at new hotels coming in front of us and new businesses coming in front of us, they want awnings that we'll be talking about shortly. And the awnings overhang public space, and that's the license agreement we need to work at. Look at some of these hotels coming forward, and you will see marquees overhanging the entirety of the sidewalk into the street. You will see other awnings and canopies and different things that overhang public space. So these are real things that are coming up, and we'll be talking about awnings as a separate ordinance shortly, but the point is, license applications, license agreement applications will be coming in front of us more and more through the end of the year, I believe. So with that one change to the license guidelines, is there any other questions up here?
I had one.
Bunky, yes, sir.
Just want to interject that I would like for, I'm certainly in support of this. I'm aware of a situation with my neighbor who's in the process of opening a business on Rehoboth Avenue, and this process has kind of stopped some of the things that would ordinarily be accepted with regard to getting his CO or whatever to get the work done. And I would just like this not to be something that's an impediment for people, that if we could in any way, if it's something that needs to be hashed out, could that be provided with a conditional approval subject to hashing it out?
How about talking with the city manager and I immediately following this meeting?
Okay.
All right.
That'd be great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
With that, is there any member of the public that would like to talk specifically about license agreements? Nope. Very good. Thank you very much. With that, we'll go to the next. Who's got the next agenda? Oh, here we go. Here we go. Thank you. Next item of old business is review the city code related to construction, including but not limited to Chapter 105, demolitions of buildings, Chapter 109, moving of buildings, Chapter 102-4, hours of construction. Evan, this is something Evan is tackling, and we'll turn it over to him.
Sure, thank you, Mayor. So I'll start with just reviewing some of the changes that were made from our last meeting and discussion on this topic. So first, we added a definition of structure, and that definition is intentionally broad. It mirrors the definition in the International Code Council's book, IBC. Again, intentionally broad in that it excludes some of the items that are listed in the structure definition in Chapter 270, which we wanted to exclude from the requirements of demolition permit. We've also added a definition of building, but have excluded the word usually, which is contained in the definition within the zoning chapter. We incorporated the same notice requirements for demolition into the requirements for building moves. That was some of the discussion at the last meeting about whether a demolition permit is required for a house move, when really it is the notification requirements that are the same for house moves. But it is a separate permit for house moves. Also, we had included at the end of the meeting last time, there was discussion about possibly considering additional holidays to include underneath the section on hours of construction. So in there, we've listed all of the city-observed holidays in the event that some of the commissioners wish to add some of those holidays to that hours of construction provision in the code. And then finally, we had inserted Commissioner Gossett's suggestion for emergency situations. That has not been included. There's a similar provision within the house move, but that was not included in that section, but that could be something that is discussed today. And that is everything that I have. Certainly will entertain any questions. Matt is here as well and can help answer any questions that I'm unable to.
Thank you very much. This is a support document, has line numbers. Let's just go through it if we could. Also wanted to acknowledge that Julie Davis, resident in town, submitted correspondence. I believe the correspondence was referencing the previous iteration more so than this one, so we need to review both real quick. In terms of Commissioner Gossett, you added something on lines 69 to 71, specifically adding that the mayor and city manager, when they make a finding, that they do it in writing. They state the reasons why the public health and safety require more expeditious demolition. I have two comments for that. I'm fine with it, but I think it's not enough. In other words, you go to lines 110 to 112, also mentions emergency situations for house moving. I would suggest consideration of including it there as well. And then, to me, again, that's still not enough. Just having the mayor and the city manager write it down, to me, is not enough. There needs to be the next step. And do what with it? And what I suggest is that we modify the application for demolition and house moving and include the reason or rationale within that application before it's able to be issued. So do you want to comment on any of those comments, Commissioner, since you were the one to...
I mean, if you want to take it a step further, that's, that's certainly fine with me. I do think it needs to be written reasoning, sound reasoning, you know, based on past experiences. It came as surprises to people, interpretation of the building, et cetera. So I think that this additional language would help. One thing I also question on lines 110 through 13, I don't know why we should limit it, if you will, to house moving. It would be, could we consider saying instead of house, building and or structure moving, or rather moving of a building and or structure during such prohibited period. So instead of just house, why limit it to house, to change it to building or structure? Other things move in town. So again, just trying to keep it as applicable to all issues. You know, 10 years ago or 30 years ago when this was written, probably we only moved houses, but there's an opportunity for other things to be moved. So just to expand it, I would just say moving of a building and or structure during such a prohibited period, and then just pull up the language also from the emergency situations 7071 there.
So let me go back to as the city manager. You are specific in lines 110 to 112. You're specifically addressing house moving because we have a house moving permit, correct? Does the house moving permit include permitting for moving a part of a commercial building? Or is it specific to houses?
Thank you, Mayor. The move permit is specific to the structure itself, so you can't move a portion of the structure. Think of it as a shed. You can move that shed off of that property and prepare for the next shed to be in place. You're not moving a portion of it off, so you're not moving just the roof of it or just a wall. It's the entirety of the structure that you're moving.
But the permit, Matt's not just limited to residential dwelling units, right? It can be a shed, it can be another sort of
Correct.
structure. Because 109.2 and 109.3 both talk about building or structure in the context of moving. So I think that 109-4 probably could be revised to change it from house to building or structure, but that's something Evan, we can take under advisement.
And I think
right?
that was my interest in bringing this up, that with what Commissioner Gossett said. Is there anything further we need to amend within the permit process or code? Anybody else? I've got
Just another clarification for me. In lines 20, it's the phrase is used, or due to neglect. How do we define neglect? And is it defined in the code?
Neglect is not, to my knowledge, defined in the code. I think, we thought that was important to incorporate because, for example, lack of maintenance of the building, which may ultimately result in deterioration of the building and then thus demolition of part of the structure, would constitute, in our feeling, neglect.
Is that listed, defined in IBCC at all?
That I don't know. I'd have to take a look, Commissioner.
If I may, I believe it speaks more to abandonment versus neglect, but we can
Again,
do
just
the research for you.
Who decides, is it neglect or what have you? I'm just kind of curious on that. And that also appears in the residential too. And then a phrase that I think was brought up by one of the citizens here in line 21, the wall spanning. The term spanning, it is described further in her letter as to how that really affects a lot. And if either Evan or Matt, if you could comment on that, is that appropriate language or could it be better defined?
Sure, and I think looking at the letter of correspondence, it was about, again, the horizontal spanning of a wall. So if the wall spans horizontally the entire depth or width of the lot, whether that entire wall would have to come down. In our case, we would say no, even if it's a portion of that wall, even if it's not spanning the entire width. But we can take a look at that definition and see if we can further define that as we had with the story inclusion.
I would appreciate that. And then, again on line 32, we talk about conjunction in the city water or sewer lines and is considered a detached one or two family dwelling. And then in the phrase on line 22, we say is not considered a detached one or two family dwelling. Is that, it's a little confusing to me. Is there a better way to state that at all? I'm just.
Yeah, we had actually some discussion this morning. I think probably one of the easiest things to do would just be remove the reference to one or two family dwellings and then just keep it similar to how it originally read, which was just an entire building or structure that's 750 square feet or more and or has a connection to the city water sewer lines.
Okay. Next question, and keep going here, but under commercial demolition and residential demolition, how are you defining commercial and residential? By zone or by use?
I think it would be, Matt, you can help, but I think probably by zone.
Probably by zone. And is that somewhere that is not, I'm not questioning, but just is that somewhere written as opposed to the decision of the current building inspector?
Well, so start off envisioning an example. We've got on Baltimore, commercial zone, but we have residential house. So you're asking the question, which I think is a good question. Is that referred to as a residential demolition if you tear it down, or is it a commercial?
And the same thing with the Henlopen Hotel. You have residents, you have condominiums, you have hotel, you have commercial operations. So the cleanest to me would be by zone.
I think that's right. I think that's right because usually we have time limits when you can demo, and it's because we don't want demolitions going on in certain areas of the city during the season and those sorts of things. So probably by zone is the right.
So I would ask that that be reflected in the code as to how it is defined.
If I may,
Yeah.
we do have consideration in the code if you are to propose a residential use for a commercial property. So we already have that kind of laid out, whereas if you take a C1 property and you present a residential use to it, you're held to the R2 use restrictions as if you were going to put a single-family dwelling on that property.
Would you say the cleanest, though, Glenn, is just to say by zone?
Right.
Right, we could perhaps put it in the actual definitions of commercial demolition and residential demolition just to make clear. Because if somebody comes in and they're in the commercial district and they say, I just want to tear down my residential home, and what is the restriction on demolition zone-based or use-based? And I think it's a good question, and we should probably define it.
So we agree that it's zone-based then, correct?
Right.
However, it is. Now, again, we don't reflect in our property assessments the zoning of it. It is only done by the zoning map, which is currently, hasn't been approved since 2010. That is in the process of the CDP being approved. So is the language in here about zone use defined by zone as reflected in the current zoning map? Yes. So we should extend that definition to say where it comes from and what is the accurate map to be used.
Anything else? We'll go on to lines 118 on, which has to do with hours of construction. If you read in the support document, let me go down to 118 here. Hours of construction. Currently, in the winter time only, November 1 to April 30th, you are able to work Saturdays. A lot of people think that there's no construction allowed year-round or on Saturdays, and that's true for the whether it's commercial or the residential area. So this is, however, specifically focusing on no work days, days that are prohibited from working. That's New, and there are 5 of them that are listed in this code. New Year's Day, Memorial Day, Independence Day, Labor Day, Thanksgiving Day, and Christmas Day. And I think Commissioner Gossett, you brought up there are other observed city holidays, and should they be considered? I do want to share with you the legal holidays in Delaware are MLK Junior Day, Good Friday, Memorial Day, Independence Day, Labor Day, Thanksgiving Day, and the day after Thanksgiving, Christmas Day, and New Year's Day. So there are 9 legal holidays in Delaware. There are 5 of the holidays listed that are prohibited from doing construction, other than by the owner. There's a caveat in the code that allows owner to work on his own property 365, 24/7. But for hired hands, they have such restrictions. So I think the question in front of us and part of the support document is, do we want to make any changes there? Evan, I'm going to turn to Evan to share his philosophy on perhaps why certain days were selected in the past, because we don't know for sure, to be prohibited from doing construction.
Yeah, I don't necessarily have a philosophy. I think just maybe those holidays were picked only because they tend to be some of the more busy holidays, where we have a lot of visitorship in the city. I mean, certainly the argument can be made that some of these other days, other holidays, we have a lot of people in town as well. But again, we've just included all the city holidays. I will make a note that I don't believe Columbus Day is a state holiday anymore. So the 9 holidays that the mayor had read are actually city-observed holidays. So of those 9, I believe 8 of those are state holidays. So if there was interest in adding all 9 holidays, we'd have to amend line 121 or the following city holidays from the state of Delaware.
Is there also a different formula for the days that that City Hall is closed?
Those would be all the city holidays.
Those
yeah.
are the
all the
9 city days.
Yes, correct, Mayor.
And I guess my suggestion for bringing this forward is, again, for consistency. One set of rules for the offices, city offices are closed and no services provided, if you will, but yet there is activity going on. So in essence, there is no building and licensing overseeing of construction going on. So again, not that I don't distrust any construction workers or what have you, but sometimes, when the cat's away, the mice will play kind of thing. And I think it's just best for consistency. Also, over the years, this was set back in the early 70s. People are certainly visiting more during the wintertime. The only, restaurant you could go to sometimes was grottos. That certainly changed. Season has expanded greatly. So I think just, again, for consistency and for the aspect of having the ability for inspections or call on building and licensing to see what's going on work sites, that this change should be made.
I'm not sure I agree 100%. We allow working on Saturday and City Hall's closed then, and building and licensing. And would I like better monitoring every day that construction's working? Absolutely. And that's something that we'll talk about when we do the budget. If we look at the ones that are excluded now, Patrick, we would look at adding, see if I get this right, we would look at adding MLK Junior Day to a prohibition list of no work days, Good Friday, and the day after Thanksgiving. And I've always thought the day after Thanksgiving, at least as a holiday for employees, should be, and I think we do that now.
The state holiday.
So we do that now.
We follow the state holidays.
But the interesting thing is, okay, we say no work the day after Thanksgiving, but they're allowed to work that Saturday after the day after Thanksgiving. So it's kind of curious. Commissioner Sharp?
I guess I'm trying to go back to your first statement with what's the philosophy? And I need some help on this. To me, the philosophy is, for me, that if we do not have city staff here for enforcement or any other service, then why would we allow the service? Why would we allow the construction?
But again, I come back to why would we allow construction on Saturday?
Well, if you decide on a philosophy, we'd have to say, well, if we're going to allow construction on Saturdays, then we are going to have to staff appropriately during the budget cycle to have that enforcement available. I have never understood how we can say we have any kind of enforcement on something if we don't have the appropriate staff here to do it.
Again, it confuses me because we allow working on Saturday.
Well, you fix that by saying we don't allow it on Saturdays.
You mean change it?
Or you staff it so that you can allow it on Saturdays, but you have the appropriate staff. Am I not making sense?
By that philosophy, though, we don't have a code enforcement person working 24/7 to monitor businesses.
And that's one of the biggest issues we've heard is about enforcement over the past 6 to 8 years, about we don't have equal or applicable enforcement. So again, as the mayor referenced, I think at budget coming up, that should be addressed. But, we talk about speed, we just heard it here today, speed enforcement. We talk about parking enforcement. We talk about noise enforcement, all of these issues as the city grows with more and more people coming in and visiting, what have you, enforcement is an issue that has been forefront in comments that I've heard from residents and visitors alike. So I think to follow Commissioner Sharp's comments about philosophy, is this the time to address that philosophy and make changes?
Well, part of me says a little conundrum, because talk with the people who are having their houses built and telling them that their contractor can't work an extra 6 days a week, 4 days a week, whatever. They're not going to be happy. On the other hand, you talk to their neighbors, they're going to be happy, right? Because it's going to be quieter. And that's where I thought that Evan's philosophy was going to be more about noise and when people are here. They're here, the second homeowners come here in throngs with their family for Thanksgiving. And then they often stay through the day after Thanksgiving and Saturday and Sunday. So, I can see that. But again, it's a conundrum, because you're saying you can't work Thanksgiving, you can't work the day after Thanksgiving, but you can work that next Saturday.
So maybe we should add that Saturday.
What are we trying to solve? Is there an overwhelming amount of response that people are working on holidays, that other people don't want them working?
Yes.
When?
Yes, because there's a lot of redevelopment going on some streets in town, and I get personal phone calls from the neighbors saying, this is too noisy, why are people there, why we have no enforcement? Yes, it's exactly, because we can't have this both ways. We can't use redevelopment for one issue and say, well, we got to do these things because of redevelopment. And then on other things, we say, oh, well, are these really problems? Yes, they are problems to the enjoyment of properties by our property owners and taxpayers.
And I'm hearing the same thing.
And I'm hearing the same thing, and we ought to think about asking folks if they would bring the power in so they wouldn't have to crank up those generators every morning at 8 o'clock or 7:30 and run them all day long and then shut them off at quitting time. Just constant. They're building 3 houses over on Queen behind my house.
Again, I go back also to consistency. If it's a holiday, you say, well, city offices are closed, but yet you can work. It's hard to try to explain to residents why we have two sets of standards with regards to holidays or non-holidays. Again, these were written in the 70s and what have you, so I feel that we need to address this and go back to Commissioner Sharp's the philosophy of what are we trying to do and the complaints that I'm hearing, and it also is on enforcement.
Well, maybe I need a clarification as well. On a day where one can do construction and we have no city staff here for whatever reason, who answers the complaint call?
Police department.
Police
Okay,
department.
the police department. I would be my personal opinion, no one has to agree or find it even valid. I don't want my police officers tied up with everything that we understand is going on in our state and nationally with going out on code compliance complaints, personally.
And I would also add, I no disrespect to the police officers, but I don't know that the police officers are knowledgeable about our codes.
Well, and why should they be? They're
Agreed.
not code compliant officers.
If I could add just one thing. If you limit Saturdays, you're essentially pushing that construction back a month. So if you take into consideration all the Saturdays that you limit, you're extending that construction period for an additional month. Just throwing it in there just for consideration.
I'm not considering taking Saturdays out. The only one discussion was the mayor suggested the Saturday after Thanksgiving. What I am suggesting, though, is that we address this in the budget hearings to perhaps add code enforcement here on Saturdays at other times. Because again, one of the factors that I'm hearing, and I don't know about the other commissioners up here, but is lack of enforcement or uneven enforcement. So we have to address that. And this is one way to do that.
Well, that I've already said that will be part of the discussion. I agree with that. in terms of enforcement and additional budgeting for enforcement. Come back to the Saturday after the day after Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving Day is already a non-work day. We're considering the day after Thanksgiving and then possibly the Saturday afterwards. I'm also looking at, if you do that philosophy, then look at Good Friday is on a Friday. Now, that's in April. So would you want to consider that Saturday? Let me see. To April 30th. Maybe you'd want to consider that Saturday as prohibited also. The other holidays are mostly on a Monday, so they're not apropos to consideration of Saturday also.
Something that I've experienced on this and the other side of the coin is we have to consider fishing season and deer season, because a lot of the subs, that's what really schedules their work availability.
Well, I can tell you, when my house was under construction, there was not a construction worker there on any Saturdays.
Nope.
But again, back to the focus here. I just think that it is an opportunity to address this, and I just want to ask the question, and I think that for consistency of enforcement and having, again, in budget discussions, looking at additional code enforcement at a period of time, or shifting evenings or weekends or what have you, that's something that we've all heard about enforcement, inconsistencies and not enough at times. So.
Well, then, would you summarize then what you believe you're hearing, Commissioner Gossett, so that we can make sure we...
Well, I'm kind of listening to myself, unfortunately, but I would think the addition of the holidays included, except, Evan, you said Columbus Day is no longer a official holiday. Was that switched with Juneteenth?
So it is a city holiday, but it's not a state holiday.
So, and any comments from Matt with regards to the addition of these holidays being non-work holidays?
Let's reiterate what those dates are. Patrick, you would be adding MLK Junior Day, Good Friday, the day after Thanksgiving. Now, that doesn't include any Saturdays.
Right.
Is that what you're
also
aiming for?
We've added Juneteenth as a federal holiday, state holiday, and also a city holiday.
So that's 4 extra days added, excludes the Saturdays that we were talking about, but includes the 4 extra days of proposed silence.
Also note in the code, it does say, that that construction shall be permitted on Saturdays except where a Saturday falls on a holiday. That's in the current existing code.
Right. And do you have any comments with respect to the dates we're talking about and how they might impact city business? That's
here. Yeah. The ones that I've suggested are Martin Luther King Jr. Day, President's Day, Good Friday, Juneteenth, Columbus Day, which is a city holiday, and then the Friday following Thanksgiving Day. And for the mayor's discussion point, possibly that Saturday, because again, no one's going to be here to it.
Okay, so that's actually 2 more than what I had earlier. MLK Junior Day, Good Friday, day after Thanksgiving, Juneteenth, President's Day, and Columbus Day. Is that?
That would be consistent with our state and city holidays.
Do we not observe Veterans Day?
We do. So excluding Election Day, half day for Returns Day, and then Veterans Day is what I have.
I believe Columbus Day is turning into Indigenous Peoples Day.
Right.
I think it's going to remain.
Okay, well, again, what I'm hearing is MLK Junior Day, Good Friday, day after Thanksgiving, Juneteenth, President's Day, and Columbus Day. Are there any changes? Any members of the public want to say anything? identify yourself and et cetera.
Carolyn Diefendorfer, city resident.
What?
Carolyn Diefendorfer, city resident. I would caution you all about adding days because there's no enforcement. If you're going to start that, let's close restaurants on Saturday and Sunday because there's no enforcement for that either. You got to deal with the enforcement issue without holding the hands of the businesses. And you talk about wanting to protect property owners. Well, if I'm a property owner and I'm building my house, I want my rights protected too to get my house done as quickly as possible. So I think you need to deal with the enforcement issue outside of holding the hands of the businesses. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn.
I must be confused. I thought we already agreed we're going to talk about the whole enforcement issue during the budget cycle.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Anybody else? No. All right. Is there anything further within this version of amendments proposed for demolition?
Can I just confirm,
House
Mayor?
moving. Yes, sir.
We're not touching any of the Saturdays?
No.
Okay, thanks.
Saturday after Thanksgiving?
Anybody?
I don't want to put any more restrictions.
I think we should leave the whole Saturday issue alone until budget time.
Fine with me?
I'd like to hear from the contractors and the builders. I'm not uncomfortable with what we have now, frankly, but there is something appetizing.
We represent the residents and taxpayers, not the construction workers and what have you. That is our
The
first.
construction workers who are working for our residents and taxpayers.
Do we impose a real hardship if we ask people not to run those generators? Why are they not bringing power to the job site now?
I think it would be problematic to have electricity run to an open job site. There's a lot of stuff that could occur. A lot of people put in jeopardy. A lot of the workers that would be, put in harm's way, basically. And you would have to check with OSHA laws to see if they would allow a straight electrical connection during construction. During remodeling, that's a whole different concept, but during construction.
When do we not allow temporary power from the very beginning? Am I missing something?
Typically, it's all generators, everything like that.
The reason
Gentlemen, we're off topic.
No, I'm talking noise, Mayor. I'm sorry.
Yeah, thank you. That, if you want, we can put it on a future agenda.
Anyway, I think that my problem with with construction is noise, but maybe I'm totally missing everything then.
I'm just saying it's
I hear you.
valid, but it's not part of this conversation.
Okay.
I'm trying to bring to close this topic. Is there anything further? We've gone to the public. Go ahead, Walter. This is specific to the topic at hand, which has to do with demolition, house moving, and hours of construction. Go ahead.
First of all, I think,
Identify yourself.
thank you, Walter Brittingham, 123 on Open Avenue. I think you're doing a good job. I think the problems are coming about enforcement, and I also think about the extra days added to it are better done at budget time because it requires, in some cases, a person to answer the phone in addition to the person that's got to respond to the situation. And that can get expensive. And then what happens to the police department, that becomes a contract issue. But I would just like to bring something up that I think is appropriate. Do we require posting of a building permit? Is there a fine if you don't?
Not really.
Okay, so I just remind those of you that have been around here and to the rest of you that years ago, there was a situation at Silver Lane, and the magic is if somebody's got a, I don't think as of this time we still publish anything about the issuance of a building permit, do we? So what happened back then, and I consider this relevant, so that you get a building permit, if you have something controversial, you hold on to it for 31 days, you don't post it, there's no penalty for it, and then you go out and then the person that has a complaint hasn't responded within a reasonable amount of time. Mr. Solicitor, that pretty close? Right. So I think somewhere in the process, there needs to be a requirement for a posting of a building permit. There has to be a date or something. There needs to be a 911 address put on it. So in the event of emergency or delivery or anything else, and I don't mean to burden building and licensing, I think they have a very, very difficult job because there are no good people there, but they are good people and they have to live by the black and the white, or they get chastised, and then Mr. McDellis gets into it. At one point in time, the Delaware Coast Press, which was an old paper, posted in the paper building permits, and that worked at the time, and I can't believe how many building permit applications that building and licensing get today. But Mr. Mayor, it was Commissioner Mills at the time, and now it's Mayor Mills at the time. I don't think we're any further to publishing building permits, but I think to have some transparency, that there needs to be a posting, since we have a posting of getting rid of an old property, building, et cetera, moving one, there needs to be a posting of a proposed building permit so that the people know on a property if something is proposed to be done, and that lets things not become an emergency. And I'm not saying it should be part of what you're doing now, because what you're doing now is very proper, but I think it needs to be cleaned up and added, period. Thank you.
Thank you, Walter. Anybody else? If not, we'll move to the next item of, which is new business. Presentation by Burt Dukes, the City Finance Director, on the city's independent audit prepared by the firm Barbacane, Thornton and Company for the fiscal year ended March 31, 2022. Burt?
Mayor, if I could interrupt just a second, I need to excuse myself at noon. Just want to let you know.
All right, thanks for letting me know. Do you want anything on the screen, or are you just going to do an oral something?
See if this works.
I mean, I'm controlling the thing now. Do you have your own?
I have overheads here for the summary of.
Okay, do you want to try to do that, Ann?
I don't know whether you, there we go. This might be the best news you've had all day. We had a very good year, very fortunate. I would predict that we probably won't have one this good next year. On Friday, the audit committee met, and they approved or recommended that the commissioners approve the audit report at the regular meeting. The auditors, Barbacane, Thornton and Company, gave us an unmodified opinion, which is essentially a clean opinion, meaning that basically they're saying that our financial statements are fairly presented and in all material respects. So that was good news. We usually get what's called a single audit. That's in addition to the financial audit. And single audit is essentially a compliance audit, where cities or organizations that receive over $750,000 in federal grant money have to have this compliance audit. This year, it wasn't necessary because we didn't receive that much money. I want to talk about the city's net position. First of all, I'll talk about liquidity. You can see that our liquidity increased substantially by almost $9 million. The real reason that we had such a good year, our expenses were fairly under control, under budget or close to budget, but the revenue exceeded what we originally budgeted, projected. Parking revenues were outstanding, and transfer tax is still strong. So we see the benefit of this revenue in these cash numbers. The city receives financial statements on what's called a government-wide basis, these are basically full accrual financial statements. We keep our books on what's called a modified accrual. It's very close, but it's the modified, the funds statements are essentially a more near-term look. Not really, they don't really include a full balance sheet, but that's been the standard in government accounting for many years, and it just gives you basically two different looks. But on a full accrual basis, our change in net position was over 7.8 million. Now, essentially what we're talking about is basically the difference between, that's essentially a surplus. It's essentially the difference between assets and liabilities changed by that amount. On a funds basis, the short-term focus was 6.8 million. One of the things that you don't have on your fund statement is things like depreciation, which is a non-cash and charge. There's some differences, but I'm not going to, unless somebody really is interested, I'm not really going to get into the technical differences between the modified and full accrual. The water fund and the wastewater fund had a good year. Net position changed on the water fund by 2.3 million. The wastewater fund, it declined by 127,000. The wastewater fund operating models changed because we've taken on debt for the outfall. And I'll show you, I'll give you a slide on that in a few minutes. But on a cash flow basis, wastewater did fine. You have in these enterprise funds are essentially business funds, and their method of reporting is a little different in the sense that you've got a lot of depreciation expense, non-cash expenses included in here. So from a liquidity perspective, we're fine. And the 127,000 is basically just it's almost flat revenue, flat bottom line. On a lot of our funds, we like to think we have a lot of money sometimes, but a lot of our money is restricted for different purposes. In the water fund, we have water cap fees, and we have probably our largest restricted fund is our transfer tax. And many people say, does the city have a rainy day fund? And I'd say, well, that's pretty much it, the rainy day fund. And we're going to be investing a lot of those proceeds in the rainy day fund in treasury bills pending approval of the commissioners at the regular meeting. But the treasury, the transfer tax is restricted by state law, but the restrictions are fairly light. So if we had a storm or we had a strong need for the use of the money for infrastructure or other reasons, those restrictions are pretty loose, and we could free that money up, but technically it's restricted. This is essentially the section of Delaware Code regarding the restrictions, and I know you can't read all this, but these slides will be on our website and they'll be distributed. You can see in those last few sentences it's pretty loose. So that money would be available in a time of need. The city, when we Our debt has increased. When it increased with the construction of the outfall, and we've basically had a good year in the sense that we've decreased our debt by over $2 million. The debt's been refinanced. We were very fortunate because we really got in under the wire, because I don't think anybody can borrow money at 1.6%. And we were able to finish the refinancing with JP Morgan last January. And on a present value basis, that savings was over $1 million in a dollar in non-discounted cash flow basis. It was like 1.7. So that's pretty. I don't think you can say we were brilliant, but we were smart enough to know that we had an opportunity to save some money, and we did. A question that we have every year usually is, what shape is our retirement fund in? Well, basically the city employees, non-uniformed employees, are in a defined contribution plan. It has matching features. That information is available, but essentially the city it's not a defined benefit plan where we have to go ahead and promise certain benefits down the future. It's basically what gets invested and what grows through investment is pretty much it. And we have a defined benefit plan. It's a group plan through the state of Delaware, police and firefighters, a special plan. And that is a defined contribution plan. But the good news is it's more than, as of March 31st of 2022, it was more than 100% funded. And that's primarily because of the good market, good investment environment. So there's really no risk. I know there are cities all over the country, in Illinois and other states, that have a big problem with their pension plan. We don't have that problem. I think that pretty well, concludes the summary. We'll have the full audit report on the website shortly. I didn't receive enough copies on Friday to give a copy to everybody, but we'll have hard copies distributed too. And these slides will also be on the website. So does anybody have a question? Or yes, Jay?
Burt, I see they dinged us again on the interfund balances. Is there any way we're going to escape that? We're getting ready to set up a stormwater utility that's going to have an enterprise fund, and we're probably not going to be able to pay our CapEx anyway. And we're going to be right in the middle of it.
Yeah, let me just kind of clarify that. The auditors, first of all, there were no recommended journal entries. They said the books were good. The only comment they had was that our interfund balance, that is, basically we've collected money and we're holding it as essentially an asset on our general fund, which is due to the water and wastewater fund. We basically have central payment. We pay our bills essentially all through the general fund, and we track. The accounting software is very good at tracking any transactions between the funds. What in answer to your question, Commissioner, we'll write a check basically, and we'll correct that balance, and we can. It used to be in the old days. The water and sewer fund, I say the old days, it's probably 15 years ago, the water and sewer fund always had a positive balance, and the general fund wasn't, it was presented on the audit report, but the general fund was typically showing a deficit. And in recent years, the commissioners have taken steps to go ahead make the general fund self-supporting. Things like the additional revenues, including hotel tax, better transfer tax. And basically, we used to go ahead and essentially make permanent transfers because we knew we'd never be able to pay the money back. It's not the case anymore. But short answer to your question, that was a recommendation of the auditor, and we did work on that last year. We did transfer money back, but it's really just a simple bookkeeping step, and the water and wastewater fund, they're not going to be denied anything that's due to them.
Thank you, Burt. Any further questions for Burt?
Burt, just one clarification. You mentioned about the deferred pension plan about police and firefighters. The city contributes to the police department's defined pension, right? But we have no obligation to any firefighters. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, that's correct. This pension plan was really set up for cities that had full-time firefighters on their payroll, but it's correct. We don't.
Right.
We're not responsible for those firefighters.
Thank you.
Any further questions for Burt? Go ahead.
It looks like we're going to make some headway with treasuries for our cash. What are we usually buying as far as treasuries goes with our cash?
Well, this is new territory. I had talked to City Manager Lynn back in the spring about keeping our eye on this and maybe looking for an opportunity, because these rates since January, have just really gone up. And I think last Thursday's auction of 90-day bills was over 4%, the average. So we're looking to, we're talking about $16–17 million invested at 3.5–4%.
That's not too shabby.
Well, you'll see a fairly impressive number for investment income. I mean, we won't even have a full year in this because we're 7–8 months into the year, but I won't predict what the rates will be in 2024, but I don't think they're going to be back down to a fraction of a percent. So, any more questions?
Anyway, any from the public? No, thank you very much, Burt. Two items hopefully real quick. The next item of business is introduce nominations for appointment or reappointments to the audit committee. This is something that I overlooked. They stay on there until they are replaced, so their terms don't necessarily terminate, but it is typical to renominate and reappoint them on a yearly basis. Currently, the members of the audit committee include James Horty, Senior, James Little, and Bill Pearlstein. I think they've done a good job. They're the ones that met last week, so I'd like to nominate them and reappoint them at the next meeting. Are there any questions? If not, I'm going to go to the next item of business, which is to discuss requirements for membership of the Parks and Shade Tree Commission, including comparison of current requirements to those proposed in the revised tree code. In the support document, you'll see that the existing Chapter 253 trees, the membership requirements are that they be citizens and residents of the city. In the proposed tree code, it says members who are residents or property owners of the city. The difference here is a nuance that's interesting. I have one vacancy on the Parks and Shade Tree Commission that I'm trying to fulfill. I've got two members that have applied, but they own property in town, but they are not full-time residents in town. Therefore, they can't be members. So I've got this vacancy awaiting with two possible members that I could appoint. What I would like to do is put this on the agenda for our next meeting, voting meeting, and consider adoption of a new ordinance where we change the membership qualifications to reflect that of the new tree code. I don't particularly want to wait until we consider adoption of the new tree code because we don't know whether that's another month or 2 months away. Are there any questions on this? Very good. Thank you very much. With that, we're going to go to the next item of business. We're not going to finish everything, I don't think, today, but the next item of business is to discuss an ordinance to amend Chapter 215 Restaurants of the Municipal Code of the City of Rehoboth Beach by amending sections 215-1, 215-2, 215-3, 215-11, and inserting a new Article 5 relating to establishing regulations for outdoor dining on public space and a licensing procedure for outdoor dining on public space. This can afford us the opportunity to discuss current policy, possible amendments to that current policy, and possible amendments to existing Chapter 215 restaurants. What I would at least like to get done today is to have Evan Miller, who's done the lion's share of that. He has conferred with Patrick and myself to bring the policy that we adopted and that we're using into the code so that it carries more weight. So in a minute, I'm going to turn it over to Evan to go through how he envisions that this would be codified. And then we can talk about that. We also have the opportunity to talk about any modifications or amendments we want to that dining policy, considering that we've now gone through 3 summers, but with outdoor dining on public space. However, the last summer, we utilized this policy as our guideline. With that, I want to make a statement that says one of the big changes here is that policy that we created and adopted is no longer going to be called a policy. We're going to be calling it a design manual from this point forward. And that reflects what we did with the design manual under the wireless code, under the zoning code. So that is one change. The other things, I just want to remind you that when we talk about a permit of compliance, that has to do with the permitting process for restaurants that want to serve alcohol, permit of compliance process. We also, within the design manual, the old policy manual, make mention of license, that we issue a license for outdoor dining on public space, and want to remind everybody that that is different than a license agreement, where that we are allowing people to utilize city property, and they may become, for this process, one and the same. They may overlap, and we'll get into that shortly. So, Evan, do you want to take it over?
Sure, Mayor. I'll try and provide, I guess, high level of sort of what this ordinance attempts to establish. So you'll recall over the course of the last couple of years, what we've done for outdoor dining on public space has been there is a license application which is required for anybody who's applying to dine on public space. That license application is filled out. It's provided by the Building and Licensing Department. Howard Rothstein, the code enforcement officer, reviews it, distributes it to department heads, applicable department heads. Will actually go out on site, verify that what is contained in the application is true and accurate. And when they determine that, in fact, all the criteria have been met, it basically comes through as an approval process, administrative approval process for the outdoor dining on public space. What this ordinance intends to do is codify that process. But now these establishments that have dining on public space require a supplemental permit of compliance similar to patio dining. It will be a similar license application process, but whereby Building and Licensing would bring in the application. Once the application has been reviewed and verified that it meets all of the requirements as set forth in the design manual, that application would then be sent or forwarded over to the Board of Commissioners for review and consideration and approval at the same time as the supplemental permit of compliance. So it's basically 2 approvals in one. One would be the supplemental permit of compliance. The other would be the license to establish the outdoor dining on public space. Anybody who's taken a look at the outdoor dining policy that we had in place, there's a lot of information in there. There's a lot of, and sometimes redundant information. So we thought it was necessary to kind of simplify that stuff, bring into an ordinance what we think is absolutely necessary, mainly being the supplemental permanent compliance process, the license process, and then keep the design manual separate outside of the code. That design manual containing all the specifications being tables up against the facade, service aisle requirements, barrier requirements, pedestrian access route requirements, all of those details, again, to be kept in a separate document, which would be kept on file at the Building and Licensing Department on the city website. We also have the ability to link it within our city code, so it's easily accessible. So that is high level what we're hoping to accomplish here. And I know there's been some questions brought up about the policy itself. I mean, there's certainly some changes now going through an administrative process to a more formal process. So we can address some of those comments, but I'll take any questions, or we can review as you see fit, Mayor.
Thank you. So Evan's taking the first stab at this based on some input from Patrick and myself. We can go through it individually. I do particularly have a few changes I'd like for consideration. What I'd like to do is offer to the commissioners too, that my expectation with the new city manager on board is that we will have enforcement of this. And I mention that because not to belay anybody, but this was a challenging year trying to get it right, trying to get our restaurants to do everything right. You know, I mean, I observed restaurants with the umbrellas overhanging public space. Well, that's not allowed. I observed barriers that were too small, too lightweight, and enjoyed creep, if you will, where over the summer the dining area was slightly enlarged each week because of the barrier system. So those are some things that I want to address. There's also some things that are probably just easiest to explain when we get to them. But how would everybody like to do this? Would you like to go through some of this? This is important time-wise because we've told the restaurants that as of November 1st, they have to remove everything off city property. And if they don't already comply with permanent compliance, then they have to remove their outdoor dining on city property, and if it encroaches on their own private property. And so what we're trying to do is give them enough time to the first of the year to be able to reapply with the new criteria so that they can come in front of the commissioners. We can issue a permit or compliance or supplemental permit compliance or the license agreement. And so that they have enough time to make application to the state alcohol license board and be able to be up and running for the next summertime. Is there anything anybody would like to review? I mean, I certainly have some changes to the design policy that I'd like to suggest. Does anybody want to bring anything particular up? Well, then I'll start on a few things then. Based on the design manual itself, let me see. Let's see. I guess I thought I would go to the design manual. Again, we're changing from policy to design manual. I'm just going to go through these quick because what I expect is that we'll make a red line version of some of these. If anybody has objections or critiques or comments, feel free to bring them up now, but otherwise we'll clarify this in a red line version for next time. The separation barriers defined as physical, you can see how it's defined there in the policy. We need to look at 270-19 use restrictions, and I think bring in that definition of separation barrier into this that mentions 42 inches high. But in addition, I would like to see some mention of strength of the barrier. As I mentioned, I personally don't think that a 4x4 with rope is sufficient because people walk right over it. The posts end up being moved closer together and the rope sags and you can walk right over it. So I'd like to come up with some language that they need to be more substantial and can't creep, if you will. The outdoor dining rules. Oh, this is. There's a mention on the, whatever page this is, in the design manual of the configurations. And I think it's easiest to go back to the end here. Two things that I think Commissioner Gossett mentioned last time. One is we're identifying in Appendix A the depth of the pedestrian access route. It's either 10 foot, 8 foot, or 7 foot. And we need to add in there that down here, Baltimore Avenue, Wilmington Avenue, North First Street, Second. We need to add Christian Street because that's commercial. We need to add North Second Street. We also need to add what, Patrick? Rehoboth Avenue, and this is, again, this is in this box here. Rehoboth Avenue from Second Street to the canal. And Lake Avenue between Rehoboth Avenue and Third Street. And then I don't know if we need to better articulate North First Street, South Second Street, and the limits, because it's just within the commercial section. Of course, if you go further out into the residential, well, they're not allowed to have it anyhow, but I don't know the best way to articulate that.
I don't know if it's we could perhaps present a map with this also that would be a little more indicative of the zoned or permeable areas.
So we'll clean that up. Maybe that there's space right below it to do that. Also, we make mention of the two-top table configurations. This is a two-top table configuration and a four-top. And how they are articulated in the design manual is that the table has to be up against the facade of the building or structure. The chairs are on the side. Same thing with a two-top table. The 3-foot service aisle is here, then up to a 1-foot wide barrier here. We saw this summer at least one, if not two, places reversing this so that the 3-foot aisle was up against the building facade and the table was up against the barrier. So I'd like to make that suggestion is that we also do the same thing, but do a 180 with it so that they have additional options. And
Mayor, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Before we go through all this, is the Wilmington-Baltimore streetscape plan part of this? With the eating outside and...
yeah, but that, there will be considerations.
Yeah, I just didn't...
But I think the general answer is no right now. This is standing independent.
But it may change if that changes.
Possible. Oh, yeah, we can come back to it, you know. Go ahead, Patrick.
I'm sorry, that's one of the reasons we moved to the design manual standpoint, because that's not part of the code, and it can be easily revised and changed to meet the needs. That's one of the things that I thought would be better, is that instead of us coming back to have the code changed, that modeling what we did with the wireless process of having a design manual. It's much easier to make those changes and accommodate what's going on and what's in real life situation. Like we noticed, as the mayor said, people were changing the positions of tables and what have you.
Right.
So we experienced it, we make those changes. And that's much easier to do in the design manual. Once we come up with whatever the next step's gonna be with the streetscapes, I think that is a major change that would be made in the design manual. As we just talked about limiting those streets, there would be a different classification.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just going to go over a couple without even referencing them just because it's quicker. But one is an operational item. It mentions hostess stands, menu stands may not be permitted outside of the barriers. And I found that I would like to make it allowable as long as it's not within the pedestrian access route, because we did find at least one with their hostess stand out of the way on their property or within the front confines of their property. And it did not seem to be a problem. So that's one change I would like to make in there. One of the things has to do with the fees. Well, we want to address what line did you have there? Well, let's look at fees. We have a $150 fee.
This line, beginning on line 519.
Okay.
Not of the design manual, but of the draft ordinance.
519, let me.
Which one, Evan?
Of the draft ordinance. 519.
The new Article 5.
Oh, goodness gracious, where are we? Is that in your ordinance?
No, it's a second document.
The
519.
Oh, this is
Keep going, yeah.
taxing my finger. Okay, that's under fees. Okay. Under fees there, we have $150 that is for the first time applicant. So again, if you talk about a first time applicant, $150 plus $325 if you serve alcohol, $163 if not. I'm questioning why we just don't roll it all into one. For a new applicant to pay $150 plus $325, $475, period. Just to make it easy, and I think it covers all our expenses as far as application and the license fee of $325, just rolling it all into one. I still don't understand why we would give a break of $163 to somebody that doesn't serve alcohol. I don't see that there's any big differentiation in terms of enforcement between somebody that sells alcohol in a restaurant and somebody who does not. So I'd like consideration of that. Also, I think we need to, if you agree with that, we need to take a look at repeat applicants. So the following, remember, this application is an annual thing. So for next year, when they reapply, if it's a brand new floor plan, then it would be the same thing, 150 plus 325. However, if it's a repeat application and the floor plan is exactly the same, I'm willing to waive that 150 license application fee and just charge them the 325. So I'd like to throw that out on the floor.
Mayor, and maybe a response from the Building and Licensing Department if they can, but even if it's a reapplication, doesn't that require the ability to review it and go out and physically examine the space so that it is the same setup as the previous year?
Yeah, I'm just willing to consider, I haven't made up my mind, but consider waiving that 150 the second time and just charge them the license fee. But let's get some feedback from Matt.
Yeah, with every application, we would want to do a visual affirmation of that application.
So you would be doing the same amount of work each time, so that the 150 the first time versus it's the same amount of work time expense for the department as it would be the first time.
Essentially.
So that,
And there's no administrative savings at all then?
No.
so that could resolve repeat applicants. Just leave that fee in there.
Yeah.
What about charging the same fee to restaurants that serve alcohol as well as establishments that don't serve alcohol? Is there any reason to not combine them and they're the one and the same?
I don't see any, Mr. Mayor. We differentiate only to a business license aspect of those two circumstances. I don't necessarily see the advantages or disadvantages having different fees. Obviously, it becomes more of an enforcement, if you will, issue between the two. So to keep it, simple across the board, building and licensing would like to see one fee regardless of the application.
All right, and put that document camera on, please.
I guess the other question that I had, or suggestion, is in the same fees, is that we just insert the words a non-refundable fee of 150, and then also that the 325 cannot be prorated, because again, if you apply for it and you go out and do your measurements and inspection review, that's your time, your effort, your energies, and you decide that it doesn't work, you've still expended that time, staff time to do. So if somebody says, well, then I want my money back because I can't do it, I just don't think that's wise business. So I would suggest we put in a non-refundable fee.
Okay. I was just trying to illustrate what I came out with first, and then we'll modify it. And that is that your first year, or for modifications, I had put application fee of $150, the annual license fee of $325, and the permit of compliance, don't forget, is $1,000. So we're talking about $1,475 for the first timer, or for subsequent times when they have modifications to their floor plan. Now, again, this is before we had this conversation, but and I had down for subsequent years, and at the same floor plan, I was going to say $0, $325 for the license fee. They've already gotten their supplemental permit of compliance, right? So they don't need to reapply, correct? So that would be $325. Now, to modify it to what we talked earlier, so now we said, okay, subsequent takes the same amount of work to evaluate it on a yearly basis, but put back in that $150 fee, $325 for the annual license fee, $0 for the permit to come on, so it's $475. Now, again, what I'm doing, though, is combining those that sell alcohol and those that don't. So there needs to be an agreement there. If you agree with that, then this formula, I think, works fine. If you don't, then we need some more columns.
I think that works. And point of clarification, if, again, the application fee, building licensing goes out, reviews it, and finds that it doesn't meet the standards, then they do not, in essence, have the fee for an annual license fee because they don't qualify. So it's step one and then step two.
Now, one of the things Evan helped me out here that we were talking about was this fee of $325. Okay, the application fee takes into consideration building and licensing time to evaluate, analyze, and go out there and do their thing. The annual license fee, again, is different than the permit of compliance. So what is that fee actually covering? And that's where Evan helped me out here. I think we were thinking that the annual license fee covers part or all of a license agreement fee, because we would be giving them authorizing them to be able to set up on public space, which is the same thing as issuing a license agreement. Is that how you?
Yeah, that's correct, Mayor. I mean, I think when we initially drafted this policy and we established the 325, I think that's typically what we charge for a license.
Business license.
Right. So here, I mean, given the discussion earlier today about some of the considerations that the commissioners can think about when executing a license agreement is what is the impact on the public's use of the property? In this case, we would have a private business profiting off of that public space. What type of encroachment is it? Is it above, above the level of the sidewalk, so above 8 feet, 15 feet, or is it down at ground level? So I think there's some other considerations that can be thought of. And just knowing that the 325 was established back when we adopted this policy, mainly just mirroring the cost of a typical business license.
So would there be a consideration, I don't know if there's such a restaurant out there that has 100 foot of width, double a 50-foot width, should they be paying more of a fee? I mean, I don't know that everything has to be solved now, but I think we need to give it some more thought.
Yeah, my only suggestion on that is initially keep it as uniform as possible. Perhaps in a future year, if we find that, there is great expansion, take a look at that. But I think for now, to keep everything as simple as possible or as equal as possible would be the best move.
I'd like to go to a section.
Line 603.
603. Line 603, under license suspension and temporary closure. It mentions when the outdoor dining area is closed longer than 30 consecutive calendar days or closed by the city manager or code enforcement officer, removal of table, chairs, related equipment, instructions will be at the direction of a city official, and the removal of stated items from the public space is the responsibility of the restaurant owner. This, I think, brings up a couple things that Evan mentioned. One is, as of this year, we made everybody clear off the public sidewalks November 1. Do we want to continue with that? Do we want to make it a year-round basis? Because the license is from January 1 to December 31st. Do we want to make it year-round? Do we want to open up the public sidewalk for dealing with inclement weather and snow? If so, do we want to say, change the license time from March 1st? It's good from March 1st to April 1st. Those are some questions that we came up with that we thought needed to have some kind of contemplation on how long the license lasts and whether indeed they need to be pulling off. Look at today, 70-some degree day, and there's no outdoor dining out there, and we can't be perfect with it. So again, does anybody have any thoughts on limiting the time?
I think we talked about leaving this up to the owner-operator or the licensee to 12 months. I mean, it's their option. The concern was, perhaps major festivals, Sea Witch, 4th of July, that type of thing. Also snow emergencies. But there is application or provision within the code that the city manager has the ability to inform those individuals to clear the sidewalks in an amount of time for a event or snow emergency or what have you. So we have the ability to manage that. It's just a matter of communication with the license holder to say, you gotta clear it out by X or Y.
Puts a lot of burden on the city manager, but
I
mean,
think
we just got through Seawitch, one of the busiest weekends of the year, and the outdoor dining seemed to work fine, you know, with restricting the sidewalks. Maybe that's a good test, I don't know.
Yeah, and that way, if we leave it year-round, it's a decision of the city manager, or, you know, as, we can't predict, but as things change with security issues and Homeland Security being more involved and Delaware State Police, what have you, there may be other concerns that we don't know about in future years or in crowd control or what have you. So I think leaving that year-round permit is good, but we also have the caveat or the ability within the code for the city manager to make that decision.
But if we accept it, I think what we're telling people is the intent is that they will be able to operate year-round and keep them out there unless special circumstances warrant removal. Somebody, I can't remember if it was us, or somebody came up with a proposal of, okay, so you have outdoor dining. It's out there December, January, February, March, empty. Are we creating this ghost town type of thing that would look much nicer? I don't know. I mean, I'd like to see them cleaned off the street, but also consider that some of these barriers that we want now heavier, harder to move, are going to be harder to move, you know? And so I'm kind of mixed on that. I'd like them cleared away, but
I you know, hate to restrict the businesses for not operating year-round, because there is possibility they could do that. And perhaps in conjunction with the chamber and also Main Street to, you know, if you're going to be closed down the month of January, February, clear it off to make it look not as ghost town, if you will. And I think over this winter, we've seen people, or the past season, clear it off. Again, I haven't heard anybody really talking about it looks like a ghost town or, you know, deserted areas because tables and chairs are left out. Maybe you have, or somebody just projected that discussion. But again, I think trying to keep it as manageable as possible if it's open year-round, or the ability to stay open year-round is the licensee's prerogative.
Come ahead, Carol. You know the routine. State your name and
Carol
affiliation
Everhart,
with the city.
Rehoboth Beach, Dewey Beach Chamber of Commerce. I just want to encourage two things. One is consistent, simple and consistent. One fee, here it is, this is your fee. I think it makes it easier on the business, it makes it easier on your employees, and they remember. You're not changing it all the time. And as far as the year-round goes, I agree with leaving it up to the business owner. They know their business. They don't want to see their property damaged, and they don't want to see their property look as though it's unattended. So I say leave it up to the business to make that decision on their own. Okay?
Thank you, Carol. With that, unless there's anything a commissioner would like to point to, I'd like to go back to Evan, who created this first draft. What would you like us to focus on?
Sure, Mayor, thank you. A question under appeals, that would be line 634.
Okay, go ahead.
So this mirrors the language that's in the design manual or the policy. So right now it says that appeals of the denial of a license authorizing establishment of outdoor dining area on public space shall be in writing to the city manager. I guess my question is that if the building and licensing department brings in an application, they deny the application because it does not conform to the requirements set forth in the design manual, is there any desire to keep some type of appeal process in there? And if so, my next question would be, who should the appeal go to? My thought is, if the appeal or the license is being granted by the Board of Commissioners, is there any desire to have the appeal come before the Board of Commissioners? So it's sort of a two-part question there. And I could foresee, I guess, two different appeal opportunities. The first would be application comes in, it's denied by building and licensing because they don't, for example, meet the PAR requirements. So that would be a denial. Are they allowed to appeal? The second option would be somebody comes in and they meet all the requirements, but for some reason the license application comes before the commissioners and the commissioners deny that license application. At that point, is there an appeal process? I don't believe they can appeal to the Board of Commissioners. So just the entire appeal section, I just need some guidance there on how to address that.
Glenn, do you have any guidance there? I always like appeal process.
It seems to me, Mayor, since this is really a restaurant issue that we should, that you all should consider as much mirroring how you do appeals for permit of compliance issues. The appeal of a, I'd have to look at this, Evan, says I don't think that there's an appeal of a, building and licensing pretty much is a conduit when they come in for permit of compliance. So they move you through. They don't, building and licensing will not deny a permit of compliance. It'll come here. So I guess all I can recommend, Evan, is that we need to look and make some recommendation to the commissioners that is similar to restaurant appeals as we can, because once a permit of compliance is issued, if building and licensing issues a citation or a fine, I think there is an appeal to the city manager, not to the Board of Commissioners. So
For permanent compliance?
Yeah. Why don't you let me and Alex take that under advisement and see if we can come up with some, commissioners, to Carol's point, let's keep it as similar and simple as we can. So we'll try to find what's currently in the restaurant chapter for other sorts of appeals and try and make a recommendation that's similar to that process that's already established.
Okay. I can work with you on that.
Okay.
But I guess
what we're saying is we want to preserve an appeal process.
I think that's right, but Evan's question though was, is there a strong desire that if there's an appeal of a denial at the building and licensing level, is there a strong desire that the commissioners see it? Is that
right?
Yeah.
I don't have that desire. I don't, because I would think that's the perfect way to undermine the authority of the city manager.
Right.
So in other words, appealable to the city manager, and then that's where the buck stops. Do we have any other situations like that? We're going to be talking soon about the trees. I haven't forgotten about the trees and the mitigation plan and people not wanting trees in front of their property, and how does that get appealed?
Or does it get appealed?
Or does it get appealed? And if it gets appealed, who to? City manager or back to the commissioners?
Right.
So these two things are, I think, in the same wavelength. So we don't need an answer now, but I think if you would come up with some options for us.
Mm-hmm. And then I've just got one other comment, Mayor. This is under the license application section. That's line 503.
503, same document?
Yes. So again, this was brought over from the policy, now design manual.
503, city manager may revoke a license?
Yes.
Is that where you're at?
So right now, the city manager may revoke a license when the city desires to use that area for a different purpose or for failure to maintain compliance with this chapter or failure of an establishment to observe a city ordinance. My question is, if the license is granted by the Board of Commissioners, what is your expectation for either revoking that license yourself, or if the city manager were to revoke that license, to notify the commissioners of such revocation?
Following this through, it is, when we talk about a license, it's truly a business license, is it not? We're not talking permanent compliance.
Right.
So, again, to keep it following protocol, if you will, if a business license is removed or not renewed, if you will, that doesn't come to the commission, right? I mean, it's just, you don't qualify.
Right.
Yeah, the distinction here, though, is that it's a business license, but it's something more, because it's still a license to use public property. Right. We've always said that public property is controlled by the commissioners.
Okay.
So it's a little bit different than revoking a typical business license that's given to a private property owner to operate a business on their land. Here, it's a business that has a license to use your property. So the license is a little bit more than just a business license, because it's the use of public property. So that's the only distinction that I would draw that would maybe make you say you want to see it. But again, I think our preference from a staff perspective is authorization for the city manager to make these decisions, inform you all, and then if something's not going right, then you can give direction back to start bringing these sorts of things to the commissioners. But the likelihood that this is going to be happening on a reoccurring basis is very, very unlikely. The city manager wouldn't revoke a license for use of private property unless there was a real issue that demanded it.
I support that 1,000%.
Well, do you agree with the line that says he can revoke a license for failure of an establishment to observe a city ordinance? That's any city ordinance. Mm-hmm. The sign code, the anything. How far can this go?
Well, if you try to reverse think it in my head, and maybe I'm wrong, that if this is not in here this way, then the city manager's hands will become tied at some point. And that's what I don't like, is a city manager unable to act, let's say, on a habitual situation.
Yeah, I continue to a little bit preach that, this is a different scenario than a private property owner having rights to do things on their private property. This is an act that's entirely discretionary of the commissioners, because it's your land. So there's needs to be less procedure from a due process perspective in the revocation of this sort of a privilege. It's not the same sort of property right where you have when you're doing something on your own private property. So I would think that in this instance you would give more discretion to the city manager than you might when it's dealing with a private property right.
I would leave language as existing there. Yeah.
Anything else?
No, that's all I have, Mayor. I do have further comments on 215 as it exists today, but we can bring that forward at a future meeting.
Yeah, what I'd like to do so we don't go forever is, even though I had the opportunity and the agenda to talk about any proposed changes to 215-restaurants, in addition to what we've proposed today, and the opportunity to talk about the design manual changes, which I proposed a couple today. What I'd like to do is defer that likely till our next regular meeting, just to keep this moving and fluid. Because again, I have a deadline, or I'd like to hit a deadline at the end of the year, possibly, to vote on this, so that we can keep restaurants informed and allow them time to reapply, come back in front of a permit of compliance in front of us, and then make application to the alcohol commissioner. So with that, I'd like to conclude this unless there's any further comment, and we'll resume at our November regular meeting. Continue to talk about the three documents. One is any proposed changes, additional changes to the documents in front of us today in terms of codifying the design manual, any changes itself to the design manual, and then any changes to Chapter 215 restaurants. Are there any further questions? Thank you very much. Thank you for...
Before building and licensing leaves, I don't know if you're heading out, but I have a question while you're here, just sort of related. It's not on the agenda necessarily, but future agenda item, the permanent compliance that we're going to look at on the 18th for the restaurant in the old Sandcastle. I'd like to know when we'll see that material, hard copy that we can see. And then also, I noticed that the application reads as 123 2nd Street, but the restaurant really faces Rehoboth Avenue. And it just, if you could address that question at the time of the permanent compliances hearing. And I'm also just interested to know that the building seems to be still under construction, as does the restaurant. So I'm just curious as to if we're paralleling any of permits being issued or signed off on occupancy, this type of thing, separately, or is it looked at as one unit? Again, just address those questions that when we look at the permit of compliance. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, we'll go to commissioner announcements or comments. As the city manager reminded us, City Hall is closed tomorrow, November 8th, for Election Day, closed a half day, the latter half of the day on Thursday, November 10th for Returns Day, and closed all day on the 11th, which is Friday, for Veterans Day. Are there any other commissioner announcements or comments?
Said one comment that I could ask of the city manager. You had talked about the budget process has begun. Is there a time frame or any opportunity that you would like comments from the commissioners as to what they would like to see addressed?
Yeah.
Is that like?
Certainly as soon as possible. So again, December is when we will start to meet with the department heads and putting together sort of our first cut of the budget. So I think as much as we can get in there early, that'll help speed along some of the budget meetings through March. So,
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Anybody else for the city manager? If not, review future meeting dates. Friday, November 18th is our regular meeting.
Yeah.
And Monday, December 5th is our next workshop. Good of the order, anybody? If not, thank you. We'll call this meeting adjourned at 12:50 p.m. Thank you. Huh?